Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I think we'll go ahead and get started. And so welcome to Butte. We'll do a quick round of introductions so that everybody in the room knows who's here, and then we'll ask for those people that are on the webinar to let us know that you're there too. And if the webinar drops, go ahead and just sign back in. I guess the wireless here is dropping our end. So if you lose us, just go ahead and sign back in. My name is JP Crowley. I'm the chairman of the Montana Board of Housing.
I'm Bruce Bransdahl, the executive director for the board.
Jeanette McKee, board member, Hamilton.
Good morning. I'm Doug Carricker, board member from Havre.
Sheila Rice, board member from Great Falls.
Bob Gochi, board member from Ronan. Greg Gould, legal counsel from Helena.
Todd Jackson, Montana Board of Housing.
Penny Cope, Montana Board of Housing.
Paula Loving, Montana Board of Housing.
John Wagner with QTAC Rock. Alex Burkhalter, Housing Solutions.
Ginger Fancook, Montana Board of Housing.
Mina Chu, RBC Capital Markets.
Vicki Bauer, Montana Board of Housing. Mary Palkovich, Montana Board of Housing.
Mary Bear, Montana Board of Housing.
Stacy Collette, Montana Board of Housing.
Kevin Thane, City of Bozeman, Community Affordable Housing Advisory Board.
Jared Swanson with Rocky Mountain Credit Union.
And Zach Tondre with Rocky Mountain Credit Union.
John List from Hamilton. I'm just sitting in and kind of interested in what you guys are doing.
Penny, do we have people online yet or no?
JP, this is Pat Melby, board member from Helena.
Thanks, Pat.
And JP, I'll tell you that we also have Andrea Davis, Janine Moss, Logan Anderson, Miranda Holmstrom, along with Pat.
So because we are on the webinar, we do need to use microphones this morning. So if you're going to address the board, you will need to come up to the podium and use the mic. If you're on the phone, if you *2, it will mute your phone. And if you press *2, it will also unmute your phone, and it will tell you that. There is a little bit of a delay, so don't worry about that. Just hit *2 and hold on patiently, and then we get our attention. You can also raise your hand on the webinar for Penny. Restrooms are out in the hall. Coffee is kind of just right up the couple of stairs there, so you can help yourself, and then there's some rolls in the back.
Okay, welcome everyone. We'll go ahead and get started with the agenda. Is there any public comments on things that are not on today's agenda? Okay, we'll move on to the minutes from the last meeting. Board members, have you had a chance to look at those and review them?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, minutes are approved. We'll moving right along to the finance program with Ginger Fancook.
I knew there was a reason why I made Mina come up with me. Good morning, board members, chairman, public. This is Ginger Fancook. I'm with the Montana Board of Housing, and I have Mina Chu with RBC with me. We're going to go over the accounting and finance dashboard and some upcoming things. Last month, or in November, we had 69% of our investments in the low yielding money market accounts, and we've managed to move most of that into a little higher yielding investments. We're down to 37.3% in December, and we were able to invest even more of that money market in other things. We are trying to leave some of that in cash so that we can do some bridging for our new series that we're planning on doing in May, which I'll talk about a little later. I did want to mention that on the weighted average yield, there was an error. It is not 77.7%. It is, it's 1.29%, which is more in line with some of the other yields that we've been running. We've continued doing mortgage purchases in 2015 Series B, and we have used those funds, and we're now in the process of bridging for the 2016 Series A. Mina is going to give us a little information about that. If you turn to the next page of the packet, you'll see the investment maturity page that shows where our investments are at this point. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mina. She has a few things to say about the issue we're planning on doing.
Great, thank you. So you are currently lending at 3.25, and so you're bridging for that, and we're looking to issue new bonds next month to close in May. In conjunction with that, you have about $25 million of prior bonds, the prior pre-almond bonds, and those rates are currently at 4.61. And just like a refinancing of mortgages, we're looking to lower the bond rates on that. They're currently hovering about 3% if we were to refinance them today, and obviously that's subject to market rate changes until you actually price the bonds and lock them in. And you have higher rate mortgages because you are currently lending at 3.25, and so that's not going to cover the cost. So you have higher rate mortgages around the same rates, 4.60 thereabouts, so that you can subsidize the new mortgages and have a profitable program going forward. So $25 million approximately of prior bonds, mixed in with whatever you decide how big your program going into the summer season, whether it's between 20 or 40 million of the new program. We will be looking at that to price next month to close in June. And close in May for a bond call in June. And as we mentioned, the rates will not be fixed until we price the bonds and subject to market rate risk.
And if anyone has any questions, we're open for questions.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Okay, moving right along to the home ownership program, Vicki Bauer.
Good morning. First item on the agenda for me is lender approval. I have with me Jared Swanson from Rocky Mountain Credit Union. Rocky Mountain Credit Union has applied to become a participating lender in the board programs. They have offices in Helena, Bozeman, Belgrade. Their articles of incorporation from Montana is dated December 16th, 1940, and at that time they operated under the name of the State Capital Employees Credit Union. They're interested in the MCC program as well as our loan programs. Their loans will be serviced by Montana Board of Housing. They, according to their most recent report of conditions for the quarter ending December 31st, 2015, they had an equity to asset ratio of 10%, which meets the board's requirement of 6%. All required errors and emissions and fidelity bond insurance requirements have been met. They're regulated by the National Credit Union Administration, and they have no adverse regulatory actions against them. I'm going to turn the mic over to Jared and let him say a few words, and he's available for questions if you have any.
Great. Thank you, guys. The credit union as a whole, we've gone through tremendous growth since I got there in 2008, and the mortgage department's been a big piece of it. So we're hoping to kind of add this at our product mix. As you know, we're a financial cooperative. We do all of our business decisions are made for our members. We think this would be a great kind of pairing to our credit philosophy and the way we treat our members. Between our 4 branches, we have 16,000 members and a pretty captive audience of loyal people. So, we're looking forward to hopefully doing business with you and being able to, especially in our Bozeman area, have other options for people to get into housing because it's getting super challenging, particularly in Bozeman. So, we look forward to hopefully working with you. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. And so, thank you.
Well, what's the size of the credit union?
Asset size, I think, was 167 million last time I checked.
Yep. Thank you. Any other questions?
I'd move approval of Rocky Mountain Credit Union.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any other comments from board members? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
This is Pat Melby voting aye.
Okay. Motion passes. Welcome aboard. Thanks.
And so, yeah, if you can just, okay, thank you, Jared. I warned him it might be a short discussion. Next item on the agenda is the board, or the staff would like to request that the board consider reducing the interest rate on our set-aside program from the 5.5% that it currently sits at to 3 1/8. The board, we have funds set aside for special programs that were created through the recycled prepayments of the pre-almond bond issuances, and they have less restrictions than the regular bond. Historically, we've used them to fund first mortgages that are paired with some down payment assistance offered by the home programs. They're typically provided for borrowers at 80% of median income. And so we would like to begin using those again, and they can't be used at the regular rate or the rate it's currently set at 5.5. So we'd like the board to consider 3 1/8 on those, which drops it down below our regular rate.
I am happily going to make this motion.
Second.
One other consideration also, as we look at reducing the interest rate on this, would be either to move the, currently also with the set-aside loans, we buy regular mortgages at 101%, and then the lenders are able to charge 1% to the borrowers. On the set-aside funds, they're not allowed to charge any fees to the borrowers, and the board buys those at 101.5%. So I would like the board to consider or give the staff the option to determine, with lending these days, fees for the lenders seems to be really important. The cost of compliance has become quite a lot. There's a lot of new regulation in the mortgage world. So I would like either the board to vote that we go to the fee structure along with that's on the regular program, or at least give the staff the ability to switch to that if it appears that the need is there.
So I would withdraw my motion, and I'll make a new motion, which is to approve the 3.3 1/8% interest rate and give the staff the ability to implement the fee programs that are associated with the regular programs if they so judge that that's necessary.
Second.
Any comments from board members?
Mr. Chair, Vicki, I'm just curious that when I read this, it says that you proposed that interest rate after the strategic planning. What did we discuss last night that made you decide 3.18 was the amount?
You know, quite honestly, I'd had some discussions with Mina, and I was trying to, really, the rate could be set at, it's the board's discretion what the rate could be set at. I wanted to get it down below the regular rate. I thought that we would have more discussions about what that potential rate would be during the strategic planning meeting yesterday, and it didn't come up quite in the same context as I had expected. So 3 1/8 is what I would like to see it at, but if the board had another idea, it would be up to you for that.
And I'm fine with the 3.18. I was just kind of curious of where it came from.
Okay.
Well, Vicki, I was going to ask a question to say, so 3 1/8, which are certainly in support of. Do you see you coming back to the board in any near future and saying, well, we could even do a little lower, we can do better?
You know, one point of the consideration on that is staff, from previous board meetings, we have the ability to adjust the rate up to 0.5%. It was given, the board gave that ability to staff some time ago. So really, when I first talked to Bruce, my first idea was to go with just regular rate. So set it at 3 1/4, and then we would have the flexibility to go either way. I'd really like to see us go below regular rate to get the set-aside funds being utilized again. And so 3 1/8 is the number that I came up with. And with that 0.5 point flexibility that we have, at least we get it down to a lendable rate again. And so I don't know for sure, you know, depending on where regular rates go, I have 0.5% to go either way before I have to come back to the board and request a rate change again.
So for simplicity's sakes, why not 3? Would you be unhappy with that?
Mina?
Sorry, as Vicki alluded to, we had some discussions about this, and some of it was based on the refunding that we are looking at doing next month, and some of the preliminary indications based on current markets. I had mentioned the bond rates could be about 3%, and so I think it was Vicki's desire to cover the cost of the bonds, and then also be below your 3 1/4 current lending rate. But she would have a better idea once we actually price the bonds and lock it in to say how much flexibility you would have in terms of the set-aside rate. But there's a lot of cash sitting in your pre-almond funds earning not very much, and you're still paying out the cost of the bond funds. And so it was in the best interest to have an attractive program to get the money out and lend it, and it would be like an investment earning 3 1/8 versus very little current investment.
I defer to Sheila for it's your motion.
I'd accept that as a friendly amendment, that we give the board staff the ability to flex up to 0.5%, as per the prior motion from the board on staff ability to do that.
The second, okay with you.
I don't think we need an amendment.
staff already has that flexibility.
We'll just take it as a restatement.
Okay. Is there any public comment on the proposal at hand? Seeing none. All those in favor?
Aye. This is Pat voting aye.
Okay. Motion passes.
So with the rate adjustment on the set-aside funds, I would also request approval of adding a program to the set-aside the loan down payment pool that we currently have. That program that I would ask to be added is called the Dream Makers program, and it provides a down payment assistance grant to active duty, reservists, National Guard, and veteran military. It's for first-time home buyers who have, or those who have not owned a home in the last 3 years. The gross annual income of the applicants used to qualify for the mortgage is no more than 80% of area median income. It's a 2-to-1 match of the borrower's contribution. They have to come in with a minimum of $500. So I would request that that be added to the pool, and that the pool, which currently sits at $6.8 million, that $5 million be added to that pool of down payment assistance, the down payment first mortgage set-aside pool that we currently have on the books.
I move to approve the addition of the Dream Makers program. Yes, and add the $5 million. Correct.
Thank you.
Second.
So Vicki, does that mean that there will be $11 million in that set aside available at the 3 1/8 right now then?
Correct.
Is there any comments from board members?
Mr. Chairman, Vicki, do you believe that there's going to be a significant usage of the program? I mean, you're adding $5 million in there.
I certainly hope so. I know when we had the program was active pre-2008, there was a lot of activity in there with the pairing of the home funds and the other programs that utilize that set-aside pool. We did see a lot of activity, so I really hope to see it take off again.
And public comment, sir?
Yeah, I'm John List. I'm actually from Hamilton, but as a private citizen, anything that you can do to assist our military individuals, I think is very important. I think it's a great thing you're doing here. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other comments from board members or public comment? All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
This is Pat voting yes.
Any opposed?
Thank you. And then just homeownership updates. As Mina stated earlier when she was with Ginger on the financial update, we're currently lending at a mortgage rate of 3 1/4 in the regular program. We're bridging for the 2016 A series that we hope to close in May. Currently, well, at the end of February, we had 105 loans reserved or purchased in that series for $16.5 million. In the month of February, we had received 2 reservations in the Veterans Home Loan Program, which has a current lending rate of 2 1/4. So total purchase and reservations in that program are $30,465,000. The Score Advantage program continues to be utilized by our lenders, down payment assistance that's paired with Montana Board of Housing First Mortgages. We had 3 reservations for that in February. to bring a total of 127 loans over the life of that program at $667,000. The current portfolio of loans is up to 5,371, and 4,222 of those loans are serviced by Montana Board of Housing. And we're finally starting to see for a long time, our portfolio, we would have more payoffs throughout the month than purchases. And I'm happy to report that at the beginning of this year, we started seeing that turn around. We've actually gained loans as opposed to seeing that portfolio continue to shrink with payoffs. So that's a good thing. And then the delinquency statistics are there for your review at the bottom of the update page. We're in the middle of our home show right now. Janine is on the road weekend after weekend. She has booths at the home shows, and then she also pairs those home show weekends with lender visits in the Billings, Kalispell. We've got the Helena show coming up, and Bozeman, Great Falls shows as well. So if there are no other questions from the board.
Mr. Chair. Vicki, I don't expect you to have this at your fingertips, but sometime I'd like to know the weighted average interest rate on the loans that we own. And then secondly, when Janine, bless her soul, this is a huge effort to be out there all the time, sitting in a booth, talking to everybody that comes by, and she does a fabulous job. My compliments there. But I wonder if we should also think about having her call on some of the credit unions in that area that are not participating under the strategic plan pieces that we talked about yesterday.
We sure can do that. And also, when I talked to Jared a week or two ago on the phone about his coming in and addressing the board, we also talked about utilizing him in our outreach to the credit union world. So we look forward to using that as well.
Any other questions for Vicki? Thank you, Vicki.
Thank you.
Okay, moving right along to our multifamily program with Mary Bear.
Good morning, Chairman, board members. Am I on? No? Okay. Thank you. Our first item is a requested loan from the Missoula Housing Authority. They are building a sixplex, which is called 110 South California, located in Missoula. It's 4 one-bedroom units, targeting 80% of AMI, 2 one-bedroom units targeting 50% of AMI. They have $700,000 in home funds in this project, and they're requesting $144,272 in permanent financing, a 20-year loan at 4%. And this loan would be funded out of the deallocated funds for multifamily, which are Raspberry funds. I asked first to make sure. And staff has reviewed this loan request and requests that the board consider and approve the loan request. Any questions for me?
Any questions from the board?
I have a question. So these funds do not come from what we know as the Housing Montana Fund?
Correct.
Okay. And the reason for that is that there's no money in the Housing Montana Fund to make this loan?
No, there are no tax credits involved in this property. So we can use funds that have come from tax-exempt bonds, which are considered federally tainted money. If we use federally tainted money for a tax credit project, it reduces the credits from a 9% credit to a 4% credit. So we can use these funds without tainting a project and causing other funding issues. The Housing Montana funds do not have any federal funds in them, so we try to save those for projects which have tax credits, 9% tax credits in.
We might have to come up with a new color for that.
Yeah. We'll just have a special multifamily color.
Is there any more questions for Mary?
Motion to approve.
I'll second.
Is there any public comment? Okay. All those in favor?
This is Pat voting yes.
Thanks, Pat. Motion passes.
Thank you. Our second item is also a proposed loan for the North Star Apartments in Wolf Point. This is the project that was not fully funded in the tax credit awards. 28-unit project in Wolf Point has 8 one-bedroom units, 12 two-bedroom units, and 8 three-bedroom units, all targeting at below 60% AMI. They also have 40 and 50% units. Excuse me. The project received a housing credit allocation of $5,570,420. They're requesting a $385,000 loan over a 30-year period, and the rate would be at 3%, and the money would come from the Housing Trust Fund. Staff has reviewed the loan request and requests that the board consider and approve this loan request. This is also permanent financing.
Any questions for Mary?
What's the interest rate, Mary?
3%. It didn't get in here. That's my error.
Mary, I have a question. So the 380, since we weren't able to allocate the full amount that they needed for this project, does the 385,000, is that enough to make the project whole so that they can complete it?
They are going after some additional home funds also. Yes, and it would be whole. The underwriting that we received would make the project whole with this loan and the amount of home money that they're going after.
So it seems to me that if we can start using the Housing Trust Fund more frequently, that we can fund more tax credit projects if it doesn't really take that much more.
That is true. The problem is that
there's not enough money.
The money replenishes itself fairly quickly in that fund, but we are funding that with only the money that goes back in from the AHP loans, Affordable Housing Program loans that were originally from the Federal Home Land Bank, and the loans that we have made on that project out of that fund that come back in.
Thank you.
So, Mary, I have one question. Would this approval potentially be contingent upon them getting the other funds?
It could be.
Should it be, in your opinion?
Probably.
I would make it.
It's always contingent.
It's always,
yeah. Cash flow, we won't let it go forward.
It's a permanent loan, so it would be taking out stuff at the end of the day. So if they don't have the money to go forward, it wouldn't happen.
Okay, well, I will make that motion to approve this loan request. And you don't believe we need that word contingent in it then? No.
We treat them all contingent because if they don't get a piece of financing and it's not feasible, they don't go forward. It doesn't matter. If you want to put it in, you're more than welcome to.
Well, fine. I'll put contingent in.
Okay.
really like that word.
Mary, would you happen to know the balance in the Housing Trust Fund after this loan is made?
Less than 300. It's about 290, I believe. Yes.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any additional comments for Mary or questions? Is there any public comment? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
This is Pat voting aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, our next agenda item is the 2017 Qualified Allocation Plan. In your package, you received, actually, in the minutes in your packet are the red line copy or draft that you approved to be put out for public comment. In the packet you received is a proposed draft that we accepted all of those red line comments so it would be easier to read. And then we have added comments on the side to show you where some of the comments that we had received by the time that the packets were put out are, excuse me, in there. We have received several comments since then, virtually all of them on Friday. Staff was not in the office Friday afternoon. So we have put all those together. We're going to try and go through most of those as we go through the QAP.
So, kind of what happened was in order to get, the 30-day comment period in, and because of where the board meeting was, we ended up taking comments through Friday, which means that I think today we're going to have to spend a little more time walking through some of these comments so we make sure that the board and staff and everyone involved just understands that. So, so just so you guys kind of know why we're doing it this way and slowing things down a little bit. And if you have any questions on that, I'd be happy to try to answer that.
So we'll work through them as best we can. You do have a hard copy of those other comments that were received. I think the top one has Alex's, or the first one has Alex's name on it. Okay.
So Mary, are we going to then step through the allocation plan and try to talk about the comments we got for each of the different sections?
Correct.
And then at each one, we'll kind of stop and try to point them out in the different comment letters. Just so you also know, in the packet that we just handed out, in the very bottom right corner, there's kind of two sets of page numbers, but the one single one, like the page 1, so all of those are numbered sequentially in this packet. And I believe Mary is going to try to refer to those. Am I correct, Mary?
Yeah.
Yeah, as we kind of walk through this too.
And I might ask other staff to take a look at those pages and help us try and find stuff if we're searching for something, please. So, Bruce, did you want to talk about how we thought they might, or Greg?
Thank you. I think the way that the board has done this the last several times has been to make a motion to adopt the QAP as presented, including the changes proposed at the prior meeting for publication, as well as the additional changes proposed by staff as reflected in the copy of the QAP you have in your packet. And then once that motion is made and seconded, the board can go through and make motions to amend the motion to either add additional material or delete or revise items. And then once those amendments to the motion have all been completed, the board can then vote on the final motion, which would include all of the revisions discussed and approved by the board today. That's contingent on Mr. Melby's approval. I think he's the one who's kind of pushed this approach in the past, and I think it's a good approach.
Yeah. Yes, and I will make that motion to adopt the QAP as presented in the packet.
Do we have a second? Okay, motion has been made by Pat and seconded by Jeanette. Mary, you get to move us along now.
Okay, so there is a little bit of clarification language on page 2 at the top. We're clarifying that reservation is now initial allocation. And then we have a carryover commitment. These are stages that we go through. And then there's a 10% cost certification and then a final allocation. Page 2, not the one in the minutes, the other one. Do we have, yeah, and she's got it up there. Might be easier for you to see up there.
Well, this is Pat. I'll move adoption of that amendment.
So Pat, I think as Mary goes through these, the ones that are kind of outlined already, you have approved those as part of your initial motion. If you want to change them or take them out or do something to them, you'll need to amend it.
I understand. I understand. Thank you. Sorry for the confusion.
Okay. And I'm going to have to go back and forth between two lists here, so you'll have to bear with me. So then we have added a definition of adjusted construction costs. And this came about because of language that is actually in the UNI app, the Uniform Application, under the tax credit supplement. We wanted to make sure that we defined that. Under the applicable QAP, we're just clarifying that language that reservation is initial allocation, and then 10% cost certification. The old language said 10% carryover cost certification. At one point, those two things were together, but they are no longer together. Construction cost definition is added. That's the same for the same reason as the adjusted construction costs, because it's actually in the uniform application. We're on page 3. And then we have a suggestion from Homeward to add a definition for expense coverage ratio. And it's basically the same as a debt coverage ratio, but it's a term used when there is no hard debt.
So what page is that comment on in this packet, Mary?
It is on page 30. It's the first item that they have under definitions. It states, please add the concept of and definition of the expense coverage ratio. This is for projects that have no hard debt for various reasons, for example, special populations, smaller projects in certain markets. It should also be an option to illustrate a project with no debt within the UNI app. This should then be considered with underwriting assumptions.
for purposes of whoever running the webinar, that was page 30 of the packet, not page 30 of the QAP. And I will move adoption of that amendment.
Second.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded to add that definition for expense coverage ratio. Is there any public comment on it? Board members, any comments?
Mary, Mr. Chairman, if I may, could you explain then how that ratio would be used in, you know, as you go through the evaluation and or scoring process? What would the significance be of that ratio in the determination?
In the past, if there was no hard debt, we didn't calculate a debt coverage ratio. So using this, we would be looking at their expenses, all of their expenses that are showing up, which are part of that debt coverage calculation without the hard debt. So we would be using the expenses to calculate a ratio instead of hard debt. Did I say that?
Any other questions for Mary? All those in favor?
Pat votes aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, that amendment is added to the motion.
Okay, and then on page 5 of the QAP, page 30, no. Page 94 of your packet. I think, are we at large? Nope.
Yeah,
Page 96 of your packet.
Yeah.
For large projects, we missed changing this to 20 when we changed in the draft put out for public comment. We lowered it from 24 to 20 for small projects, and we missed it on the large project. And a couple of... I didn't...
I'm sorry, Pat. You cut out for a second.
I think you have the authority to make technical corrections.
Yes, that would be a technical correction, clarification. And thank you to Terboy and Homeward for catching that for us.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I think there were also comments to the effect that they preferred that it stay at 24, you know, that the division between small and large be at 24 rather than moving to 20 as proposed. Is that right?
Right, and we have those with the small roll project later.
So we're going to lower that to 20 as a technical correction.
To go with what was released for the public comment, because it's something that we missed, yeah. Okay, on the next page, there's just language there added to, it's clarifying language. It just clearer names the section of the UNIAP. Qualified nonprofit from RCAC. They're suggesting that we take out the affiliated with language there. It's in the last line.
So the
Nope. Sorry, I'm on the wrong.
which is not affiliated with or controlled by a for-profit organization.
Right. And I believe that is language that you put in there in its legal language.
Yes, that's correct. That's merely restating language out of the federal statute and regulations, so those are federal requirements. This may have to do with understanding what affiliated means. It may be read a little bit too broadly by the commenter.
Okay.
And this was not intended to be a substantive change, it's merely to conform the language of the QAP with the federal requirements.
Okay, so then under the small project and small rural project definitions, we had comments from Homeward to consider staying with the 24 units.
Page 98 of the packet is the actual text we're looking at.
And it's page 30 in your comment packet. We've got that same comment from the HRDC 9. Staff's comment to that public comment is that it seems that some projects are being squeezed into the small pool to qualify for that pool, and that if a project is in the large pool, they can still apply for less credits if that is what's truly needed. We have a, you can come up to the mic if you want, Heather, or whichever you want to do.
Todd is so nimble, I'll let him run over here with it. My apologies for being late. March is a nice reminder that we're still living in Montana with the snow. So the only comment I'd make here is that I totally understand where you guys are coming from with trying to wedge it in. When the numbers are looked at, and I'd ask Alex or anybody else to weigh in, it was more in relationship to the soft cost ratio and how that was defined, and maybe we missed that because the smaller projects, whether they're it doesn't matter what pool they're in, it's just the soft costs are the same on small projects as they are for large projects, and so that 35% versus 30% is a significant difference. So I don't know if there's a workaround with that. Yeah, it's somewhat difficult to define what's a small project because different underwriters look at it differently. But we're splitting hairs on 4 units, but maybe we could just look at some matrix around that and address it next time. But it's the soft cost ratio that was our concern.
So we can look at that on page 106 when we get there? Is that, because that's where we talked about the limitation on soft costs.
So Heather and maybe the other developers, if we could change the ratio, the soft cost to hard cost ratio, then 20 is okay. The difference between 20 and 24 is based on that concern.
That's the primary concern. I'd say the only other piece around that would be, and I see the intention, and you all made it clear during allocations as well that, and there's an overarching concern that all projects are shifting toward preservation. I'm sure we'll have a different discussion later. A lot of projects, RD projects or properties in the smaller communities are just simply bigger projects than that. Cedar View, a lot of them. Is it appropriate to do new construction in those communities? Depends on the community and the market. So that's a discussion, and Alex spent a lot of quality time looking at those smaller communities and new construction. So, but I think the primary is that soft cost, but there's also some concern that preservation projects will be more difficult to do potentially, and we don't believe that all preservation projects should be 9% tax credits right out of the chute. So this is kind of one of those things that we were waffling on how to communicate around it, and wanting to make sure that we were set up for good underwriting, I guess.
Is there any other comments on that?
You know, I didn't look at this specifically the way Heather's narrating as far as dealing with the soft cost ratio, but it makes total sense what she's saying, and that on a small project, that's a tough hurdle to hit. I think that, yeah, as a developer, to be as competitive as possible for the community you're working in, if you can get it in the small pool that has been less competitive, and you try and do that. But I also think that this board has been selecting good projects, and we've seen smaller projects get funded outside of the smaller project pool. So there's kind of an edge there, but I think that's a valuable edge in that, you know, you go through the same, if not more, brain damage doing a small project than a large one, and so a little offset there can help. I guess I'd support Heather Homeward and the other commenter that let's stick with 24 just simply for the math and the soft cost ratio. I think that'd be easier than trying to reverse engineer what the percentage should be on the other side.
Any questions from the board?
I think I'd like to hear from staff again why they proposed the 20 rather than the 24. I have a general understanding. Maybe I'm just looking for more detail.
Historically, a lot of the projects have been at 20 or below. Most of them at 10, 12, and 16, actually, in the small project pool. We've been seeing a little change that way. We do have concerns that some of these projects are getting squeezed into the small project pool for that benefit. And that if the number of units were smaller, that may not happen. And as I said, if it is a larger project, they can still apply for a smaller amount of credits if that's what's truly needed for that project.
So Mary, when you say squeezed into, you mean a developer maybe really would want to do a 30, but he cuts it to a 24 to fit into small project? What does squeeze mean in your sentence?
That they maybe aren't doing, and that it falls on preservation, that maybe they aren't doing as much as preservation as they would if it was in the general pool, and the amount would not be restricted by the small project pool.
So it isn't the number of units they're squeezing, they're actually asking for the reduced amount of credits so they could stay in the small project pool,
right,
versus go into the larger project.
Right.
Based on the amount of credit they're requesting.
And if you have a smaller number of units, it gives more room to keep that credit amount in the small project pool.
So Mary, having heard Heather and Alex out here talking about the soft costs, how do you respond to their discussion points?
Maybe we need to look at the percentages on those ratios in the soft to hard cost. Raise them a little bit for the small pool, yeah. And actually both, because you have that small area in between. Yeah. or maybe break that out to one more category or something by number of units.
I would add, you could tell we were waffling about the comment as well. When you know how to, when you've filled up the UniApp and the projects forward and backwards, you know that it's just easier to up that little bit of number to not change. It fixes that soft cost ratio issue in like 8 other places. So I think that's why we were mostly concerned, and I agree with Alex, good projects get funded. It really doesn't matter for those preservation or new construction size of projects. It's really that little nuance, so maybe we discuss it there and then come back, and maybe it isn't a unit change on the small project, but maybe it is because of how detailed that piece of information is.
Mary, I was just kind of visiting with Greg, and it seems like JP had a good comment. It seems like there are several moving parts here that maybe need to be considered, and it seemed like, you know, it's something that worked okay. It's one of those tweaks that we want to look at, and could we put it on our list of let's figure out what the really right answer here is for the next year and not try to force it through?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I don't get a sense from staff it's something we're willing to go down with the ship on.
We're not going down with the ship on anything.
Comments, but we do want to make sure we get it done right. That's what I'm feeling like.
Right. I think that we'll have several of those that will end up coming up today because of our time crunch.
Think maybe from staff standpoint, if we could have an amendment to move the 20 units back to 24, and then we will put it on our long list of to-do items for next year.
Amendment made, motion made.
Do we have a second? Motion's been made and seconded. Any other comments?
Mr. Chair, if I think that's a wise decision, and I guess I'd say in that, I think also folded in here is we've seen an increase in preservation projects working through this set aside, and so I think that's also part of the discussion.
Okay. Final comments? Anyone? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that change has been made.
Okay, and the next thing is actually on the soft to hard costs. Homeward made the comment that it's helpful to have the land in the ratio, that we need to incorporate it into the UniApp. Comment from staff is that the CMA or the appraisal would be used for that amount, and they were concerned that it shouldn't be listed in expenses, and where it should be listed on the application should be in the narrative for the uses to get credit for it. We have to do something in our calculation to bring it into the numbers, and the UniApp in our calculations are outside of the QAP.
Right. We had a really lengthy conversation about donated land, and at the when we all sat down in January and did the retreat. So I agree that that's exactly how it should be approached. The UniApp's outside of this conversation, but you don't want to be penalized by the donated land, and there's some equations it touches. So just as long as it's clear in the UniApp that there's a spot filled in that it then populates those calculations.
It has been changed already.
Yeah. Yep. So we'll I'm sure we'll have some fun with the UniApp next time.
Yeah, Kelly and I went through that, and that is one thing we made sure that it was not on the uses. It was on kind of more of a narrative section that talked about other things that were brought as donations.
I think we need to make sure that it's in a calculation, though, so it shows up in the numbers when we go down to get that soft cost ratio, because that is calculated by the UniApp.
Yeah, and Kelly made me do that.
Oh, she did. I'm sorry. I didn't understand that. Okay. Okay. The substantial change list, we have one comment that came in about management companies, and we put in some language, clarifying language, that a member of the development team, that change in the development team members occurs prior to placed in service. There was concern about a management company changing throughout the life of the project. And as long as a management company, just staff comment, as long as a management company changes to a qualified management company, there is no impact on points.
On page 98 of the packet. You can also type 98 in above up there.
Takes a village. Okay, also we had comments from RCAC and Homeward on the list of items there that site or floor plans, square footage, common space square footage, that maybe we should set a percentage of change there to be looking at on those particular items, and at what point do changes need to be approved from Homeward? So if an application is coming in and has been awarded, and apparently we're getting only schematics from some developers initially with the application. They don't actually do and they're actually prohibited with federal funds to be able to have bring an architect on to do the actual drawings. So some of those things are going to change some.
Did the commenters have a percentage, or does staff have a percentage idea, concept?
We've used 10, somebody referred to the 10% that we use on the changes of the sources, on the uses, that they're supposed to contact staff or make us aware. 10% on a small building is not a whole lot. A larger number, I would think at least 20% would be more.
Heather?
Sorry, we obviously spent a lot of time looking at this and talking about it in January, and then a lot of people in the office commented, but really the clarifying piece here for us was, and we ran into this on Sweetgrass, we had some pretty significant changes because at a certain point in the project, we had schematic design, but then we got pushed and pulled by zoning and design review pieces, and it changed, and we should be able to report that. It was the concept, or our comments were based on at what point in time is the project at a point that we say this is our project, and then a 10 or a 20% change needs to be reported to Board of Housing. I think that the nuances around having the pre-application or the letter of intent, and then the application round, the way it's being proposed in this QAP, may solve that a little bit, and maybe the point in time in which we say this is our project and we will report and get approval for any changes is after we've submitted the formal application, not at the pre-app stage, because at that point, what I like about the pre-app thing is that we all, and a lot of developers do, we put in our best information we have, and then if we get a nod to move forward, then we spend money on architectural if we're allowed to. Sometimes we can't because of home funds, et cetera. But if that were the case, then we could clearly communicate with you if there were changes. But I think it's a point of award on that should probably be that point in time, or that formal application approval. And I think that's how it is, but I just talking out loud about it, I think that's a better approach.
Any other comments?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, one thing like to clarify is which of those listed bullet items this kind of 10 or 20% threshold would apply to if you're going to go in that direction.
The ones referred to were cider floor plans, and probably I think they're probably referring to the square footage of the cider floor plans there. Common space square footage, and I think yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah. It's pretty much the square footage numbers, I think.
So I think then there may be more discussion, but we would need an amendment to the motion to make that change, to make those 3 items subject to a percentage threshold. And I'm not sure, Mary, if you're recommending 10 or 20.
Is 20 high enough?
I think if a developer can make it bigger, that's great, right? Like a bigger unit's good. I think the concern here for you guys would be if units are getting smaller. If we come in and say we're going to do this great 1,200 square foot 3-bedroom, and then the product we deliver is 850 square feet, that's a problem. So I would just be concerned, I guess, with the downside are units getting squeezed. And Heather's exactly right. You can draw a unit and a schematic, and it's great. And then you sit down with your architect and all the trades, and this guy needs this much space, and this guy needs this much space, and you know, saving 3 square footage means you meet zoning. But so I'd think a smaller number, but only limiting it to decreasing the unit sizes. So if my unit's going to shrink by more than 10%, I need to let you know.
I hadn't really looked at it that way, though we did talk about that with Sweetgrass a little bit. I think the decrease is a smart adjustment. All the things that are tied to architectural, you know, we haven't spent the time to pay the architect yet. So as you change those unit sizes, the thing to consider is that a substantial change is a big effort for staff and going through a board meeting. So what is staff level approval versus the going through the full board, and when is it a big enough deal that we have changed it significantly enough? So maybe it does need to be a little higher, but we still need to communicate things to staff at a 10% level. I'm not sure.
Right now, we can approve all those changes as long as we're comfortable. So just because you report them to us doesn't mean it'll necessarily go to the board at this point. Right. I mean, we can look at it and go, gosh, that makes sense. And if we don't, then I see it going to the board. If we say, yeah, and, you know, now we're into 850 square foot 3-bedroom unit, I don't think so. You know, you're going to need to talk to the board about that. So, you know, really the percentage probably just means when are you going to have to report it to us and when not, you know.
I agree. I mean, you guys it's easy to work with you guys, but I think it's under the definition of substantial change. And if it's a substantial change, then it has to go through the formal process. Am I right?
No, that has changed.
That's changed.
That has
also.
changed. Okay.
The draft that's out that they just approved earlier has changed that.
Okay. If you look at page 139 of the packet, changes to project or application, this was a change included in the proposal, so staff has discretion to approve those things unless they feel it's something that's significant enough that the board needs to approve it. So,
with these comments in mind, I'm going to argue for no percentage. Yesterday we talked about looking at cost per square foot, and that's a 10% swing in your cost per square foot if you have a 10% ability to change things. So I think we should leave this section as is. My exception to what I just said is that I think we're okay with change proposed for the member of the development team occurring prior to placed in service. I'm okay there.
And that's part, that section right there is part of the motion already.
Correct.
We're good?
Okay.
Okay, and then we had a request to put in a definition for unit. A unit means an income restricted tenant or management, parentheses, management, security, or other residential apartment or single family home. And on page 9, I believe it's paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4.
Mr. Chairman, page 100 of the packet.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, on the definition of unit, that comment was driven, I know at least I suggested that, and I think it'd be important to also include market rate units, simply because if you had a project with both market and low income, wouldn't that mess up your unit costs and all those type of calculations?
My understanding is market units don't count. You're not using credits for those costs basis.
Absolutely, they wouldn't count with basis or anything, but when you're looking at total development cost per unit and all those other per unit limitations, you would want to recognize you had a 100-unit project and only 50 of them were market, but you're only allowed to divide by 50, it would effectively double your unit costs across the project. That's why I had suggested all unit types to clarify actually that exact situation.
I think does the words or other, would that include market rates?
No, because we stated that they're income restricted.
The reason why I bring this up is because that exact confusion is why I suggested all unit types because we use unit in the calculation on a per unit cost or operating cost per unit.
And it would, when you're calculating the per unit cost,
it would
include market units. So we need an amendment that says unit means a market rate unit and an income restricted unit or manager's unit. So we just need to include market rate.
Just take out the income restricted?
Let's just leave the amendment as we need to include market rate units in that definition, and then we'll wordsmith it.
Add market unit. Okay.
And
Thank you, Alex.
Include language so that it does clarify that market rate units are included.
Do we have a motion?
I would move that we add language clarifying that market rate units are included under the unit definition.
A second?
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any other comments on that? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Pat votes aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, on page 9, paragraph 2, this is language describing the tax credit, but Homeward has suggested that we add other legal entities in there because it only lists an LLP or an LP, and those can be an LLLP, the BIBLE, LLLLP. LCs, LLCs.
That's a technical change. We'll just add it.
Okay.
Oh no, I want to debate that.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome anytime.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Okay. Section 3, page 13, which is just a couple pages down. We're looking at
104.
Development cost limitations. We have one comment that was in the QAP that that number may be too high, that the average in the 16 apps was 144. It was actually closer to 147. And then we have comments from Travoy and Homeward that those numbers are too low. From Travoy, they're too low. Reference of cost, we should look at cost per square foot instead of cost per unit. We're having projects that have 0 studios and ones and twos compared to 3 and 4 bedroom units, and the comparison just isn't a good comparison. For the hard cost limit, Homeward suggests that number, if hard cost per unit, Homeward suggests that number be 192,500 for total cost per unit, 249,150. And then I didn't look to find where, but they're saying the costs are listed twice. We'll find that, and I guess they're right there. They're listed, and then they're in the paragraph. And they also state that Washington State does not include land or capital reserves in their calculations.
Heather?
I'll clarify. Our number may be a little bit specific, but in discussions in January, it was my understanding that on the hard cost per unit, you guys said, we talked about this in great detail, and you totally respect, and the caps are necessary on overall and cost per unit. How you look at it, we should probably have another deeper discussion for next year's, but the overall arching point was that I think the 175 hard costs came from kind of the average of the applications somewhere. I mean, that was kind of a starting point. We do want to point out that any units from this QAP that are applied for and delivered are 2 years from now, and that will be outdated. There's construction costs, 5%, 10%. We saw 20% Missoula going up annually. So we reached out to our general contractor, Jackson Contracting Group, and they said between 5 and 10% increases annually is a safe rule of thumb assumption. So our math deriving the number was, okay, so if you saw an average of 175, you need to increase it by 10%. And then soft costs go up by 3%. And so that's where the numbers were derived from. Your soft cost limits are in there and capped. So if you used your base of the 175 hard cost or an adjusted hard cost, you can only have 30 or 35%. So there's about 18 different ways to do the math on this, but I do think it, in short, needs to be tied with projected construction cost increases in something like RS means or other estimating software from not us, but from general contractors, some way. And we did pull and had somebody point out the Washington State piece, but this is a very difficult thing to derive, and we just want to be very careful and make sure that it's recognized that it's 2 years from now costs, not today's costs that are that have been projected, and that we have some sort of base that's in the construction world, and it's updated annually.
So,
push your button.
Not here.
There, you gotta hold the button down.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think it's crazy to put a number in there because it's like saying interest rates cannot go over 4%. It's got to be a formula, I really think, and maybe it's tied to Marshall Swift or something.
But why not, if there's 20 applications, why not compare apples to apples? Let's look at their square foot costs and give points that meet the standards for more efficient cost. Let them compete amongst themselves rather than have everybody shoot for an artificial limit. At any rate, I don't think we should have a dollar figure. I think it should be a formula.
So I think this is another one where we've kind of concluded that there may be unintended consequences if we were to plug a number in here like this. And yesterday in our strategic planning session, we talked to the board about cost controls as one of the things that staff needs to work on in the upcoming year, and to come together and talk about some of these nuances. And should it be a part of scoring, or should it be, comparative? In a way, board members already do that, I think, as part of their consideration. They have cost per square foot for all the projects we get, and that's all part of their thought process. At least I would assume that is. So I would recommend, because we do have the 230 in there already, and I would recommend keeping that, because I think it is essential that we have, when Congress comes to call and asks us, what kind of controls do you have in place, we can point them to that. And other states that are being audited right now have said that's one of the first questions that they get asked is, do you have a maximum cost? That's important. But to maybe take out the hard cost per unit for this year and look at that as part of our ongoing strategic planning or one of the goals of our strategic plan. But I do think keeping the rest of it in there is important, that we hold the projects to those limitations at every step of the project.
Totally support having more conversation around that. I agree, not the unintended consequences. I'll just say that 230 has been in there for like 3 years, and that's not what's happened in the economy. And so it is a high cap, and totally we should be falling within that. But I do think it needs to be increased, because it's, again, projected costs for 2018 construction projects and total project costs. So costs have not gone down. So I don't know if you want to put a 20% increase on that or have a discussion around that, but it does need to move up a little bit.
Penny, can I get you to pull up that little spreadsheet I did, hard cost? And it does show it's hard cost, not cost per unit, though. So never mind, it's going to be confusing. I think I want to say that, well, no, I take that back. We had 2 applications that were really close to the 230 this last time, but the rest of them were substantially less than that. Just for information.
Well, part of this is in our retreat, we talked about now everybody has to put every amenity in, which drives the cost. Okay, because if you don't, you're going to lose points. And so if we're serious about, competing and producing as many units as possible with our allocation, then maybe we need to score that differently. Have a baseline scoring with a dollar amount, and then you can throw amenities in there if you want to, but maybe they're not scored as highly or something. I mean, we talked about, out of the 10 or 12 amenities, most of us had never had any of those amenities in our house that we built, And so if we're really talking about trying to make the bang for the buck and get the best, I like the energy efficiency stuff, but some of the other amenities like, a smoking area and an outside deck, and I'm not sure how you price that, So, and I think they're related, and I don't think you can, if you don't put them in the way we're set up now, you're going to get whipped. But if we're serious about controlling those costs, let's maybe figure out how to define it. And I agree with Bruce that maybe that we should kick the can a little bit down the road on that.
Kevin Thane with the City of Bozeman Affordable Housing Advisory Board, and would speak in support of the comments that were just made relative to the amenities and the effect that has on the total cost of the project. we submitted some comments. Our goal is to use the QAP to help direct projects to persons who are in the very low AMI. One of the things that you do when you do that is you look at those amenities and leave some of them out, which will lower the total cost of the project. The comment about if people want to include all the amenities so they get a greater number of points, I think that's a philosophical change that the board has to look at, and I hope they will look at. One of the things that we proposed is that you increase the total number of points available so that there's a greater possibility of gaps. And there are lots of things in our comments for providing points that would do that, increasing energy efficiency and so forth. Get your points that way, get your points by lowering the cost of operation and the cost to the tenant over time, lowering the cost of construction, by encouraging innovation and creativity, allow developers to get their points that way rather than forcing them into the whole amenities bailiwick.
You know, I appreciate your comments. I appreciate listening, Bob. We none of us left the meeting when we awarded credits happy. We had 7 projects that are really good projects, and I'm happy about those, but we left 13 or 12 of you sitting with nothing. And thus, the comment you heard from Bob, and, you know, I'm affirming that we think we got to find a way to make those dollars go further in the state of Montana. And how do we do that? Square footage cost is a very critical piece of that. I'm not sure per unit cost is as significant to me, but that's really a critical piece. And we've talked about these amenities. And Bob would refer, and I would refer, I don't live in a house with air conditioning. I kind of wish I did in the summer with smoke, but, you know, I don't. So we're trying to decide, are we really being, this is affordable housing. Do we, should we, must we give all of the best? And I think it's a consideration for you guys to sit out there as well as us, maybe a new and a different way of how we do business. I mean, we're not there yet, but, you know, Bob and I just back with Bruce to legislate to Washington, D.C., and the conversation, a couple of things. One, all of our, Senator Tester, Daines, and Zinke, they don't have a clue about affordable housing. They don't understand it. I think we're certainly, it isn't that we didn't get supportive from them, but man, they don't really get what's going on. We told them about the 20 projects and how much we could give and how much we were asked for. They were all shocked. And so, and money coming out, you know, clearly that's the national board back there saying, oh yeah, we're going to look for more money. Well, obviously we're not going to get anything this year. And as elections occur, and when are we going to be seeing more? The need is there, but when we don't even have our own guys, and I think some very supportive, understanding that what we need, concerning. So how do we all do a better job on that? So if you're kind of hearing us today struggling a little bit, those are the reasons why we'd like to have, and we're obviously talking about an opportunity for maybe an initial process. So maybe there's a cut before you all have to spend all this amount of money to get to the end. And so we take all of your comments very seriously. And I think we take our job very seriously and are trying to figure out how to be better. So a lot of what you're hearing is about that.
Alex? I guess I think we're all thinking the same thing. One comment that I heard in January that was concerning to me as a part of this community was, I don't remember which board member it said, but they said they were hearing from their constituents that these are the nicest apartments built in town. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't produce nice products, but that's a little concerning to me. And I think that I was maybe the one bad guy that said, maybe this number's too high, and part of my thrust in that was that would be a natural limitation on putting every amenity in the projects is you just don't have the dollars to spend. And another kind of unique thing to this round and future rounds is thankfully Congress finally locked the 9% rate, which means on the same dollars that we're spending last year and the previous years in applications, we're all eligible for a lot more credits. And you mix that with very strong pricing right now, which obviously could change, but there's almost an incentive. Spend another dollar because you get more credits. Spend another dollar because you get more credits. Spend another dollar because you get more credits. And I guess I just felt like at some point there's got to be, this is where it stops. And whatever that mechanism is, whether it's scoring against each other, whether it's a hard cap, whether it's creating less incentive on amenities, this just seemed to be kind of the most immediate way to say, all right, Johnny, your allowance is only $10, so you can't buy every toy in the aisle.
Heather's going to speak here in a second, but I mean, I clearly get the difference of costs in Missoula, frankly, versus Hamilton and Bozeman and Whitefish and our places in the state that are, I mean, I know how much Missoula is, but I'm also looking and with real estate, and I watch what people in Hamilton can get for $207, and this isn't affordable housing. This is a Chip Pigman housing project down in the Bitterroot. But the differentials between our areas and our states are problematic, and that's another issue.
I would just speak a little bit to efficiencies of tax credits because we said we need to raise that limit. Also, I agree with Alex on some of the concerns around the use of the program, and so for us, there's nuances too. If we apply and utilize the home funds, that automatically means that we're going to have higher costs because of how we have to procure architects and general contractors and those sorts of things. So I've always thought the best way for this program to look at itself and get more units done is how do we compare against each other, and what is the tax credit, per unit, the tax credit expense? Because if Sweetgrass pushed up on the boundaries of this, and you all know that, but it was actually one of the lower tax credits per unit projects. So your program got to go a little further because we were able to leverage other funds in, and I think that's addressed in other parts of the proposed QAP around leveraging other soft costs. But cost of land, cost of construction, I mean, Bozeman is outrageous as far as land is concerned, and we have all those factors. It's just we have to be very careful about this number, and it's not just, we are trying to find more efficient ways, cost per square foot to build. In fact, we have a pretty low cost per square foot in the building. There's other things that are higher costs. So this isn't simple, but I don't want to restrict it too much to not have good projects go forward because of these other nuances aside from simply building too many amenities. And I agree looking at what's important for affordable housing. I mean, the reason we pushed green building for so long, for so many years, is it's common sense. Energy efficiency goes directly into the pocket of our residents. Healthy indoor living, where it's located, sustainable transportation, all of those pieces. Those are the types of amenities. What's a benefit to a low to moderate income individual and their ability to work or access health care, those sorts of things. Those are the amenities that are most important. Having the other bells and whistles, yeah, maybe we need to look closer at that. But there's some key things that do need to be emphasized and continued in this program. But again, credits per unit or tax credits per unit, some sort of matrix that way, then you know how we're comparing against each other. If we can leverage outside funds in, your credits are going further. You're getting more projects done.
Final comment on this, I promise will be short. I think a big win today is that in the QAP now we've got two lines. One is total project cost per unit, and another is hard cost per unit. And when I first looked at this, I went, oh my gosh, 170. Well, then I actually went through the definitions of what hard cost is, and that's like a sticks and bricks number. It backs out reserves, it backs out developer fee, it backs out soft costs. So initially I was like, 175, I could never, well, when you actually look at how hard cost is defined, it is truly a sticks and bricks figure, which speaks to amenities. You can still buy the expensive land. You still account for land variation, all that kind of stuff for location.
And part of, just informational, part of the conversation that we had at the QAP session was looking at that hard cost, because that's the number, if you're talking to people who are talking about costs on single-family homes or other projects that are being built, they're talking about the sticks and bricks costs. If we're trying to show that we're using the dollars as efficiently as we can, those are the numbers that they're comparing to.
Is there any other comments on this?
So I think, at least from what we've talked about before, was that in order to not have any unintended consequences, is we'd ask that you amend and delete the per unit hard cost limitation, but keep the other requirements the same. And then we'll put that on our to-do list and actually sit down with everyone and talk about maybe a better approach to that, containment kind of issue.
And just for clarification, would we keep in the definitions changes so that you're still going to get the numbers on hard cost per unit, but there won't be a limit on it?
I think it's important that we do, for the simple fact that we're going to provide those numbers to the board. There may not be a limitation, but you're going to be looking at them, and we want to make sure that those numbers are consistent.
Okay, so I would entertain a motion to delete the limit on the hard cost per unit.
I'm going to move that the hard cost per unit line from the proposal in front of it.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any final comments? All those in favor?
Pat votes yes.
Okay, hard cost limits are deleted for now. Okay. And before we move on to the additional cost limitations, why don't we take a quick 5-minute break? Everybody can get coffee.
I think we might need more than that. I think some of us have to check out, or at least get our stuff. Paula, does staff need to physically check out, or do we just need to get the stuff out of our rooms?
JP? JP?
Yes, Pat?
I have a conflict in a half an hour, so I may just leave at this point and have fun with the rest of this.
Hey, thanks, Pat.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Pat.
your time.
Thanks, Pat.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
All right, bye.
Okay, moving on to additional cost limitations.
That's right.
Okay, am I on? That's a good clarification. Okay, underwriting assumptions, page 15. Debt coverage ratio, we have a comment from Alex that DCR in year one is too high at 150. And we have from RCAC 1.5 is not sufficient to stay above 1.15 for 15 years with low rents and expenses between 3,000 and 6,000. A comment from Homeward that the minimum first year at 1.15 upward is not enough. A minimum, it should be a minimum of 1.15 going upward, downward at 110 at year 15. Information, we were at 1.15 to 1. I believe 1.15 to 1.25 in the last QAP, and it's been there for a while. We raised it to 1.15 to 1.1 or 1.5 if it's trending upward, and downward if it's 1.1 to 1.5.
Yeah,
and
the
that
difference
was just
between that is on the first one where it's trending upward, that's in the first year. So, you know, the 1.15 to, and then now we have it at 1.35 actually, is a fairly standard. But if it's trending upward, you know, then your debt coverage ratio by the time you hit year 15 could be, gosh, who knows what, it could be 2.2, 2.5. So I think that's reasonable actually in the market. In a project where it's trending down, what we're saying is by year 15, the debt coverage ratio is down between 1.1. I think that's also reasonable, and that's what we heard from the underwriters too. So I'm pretty comfortable with where we're at with this right now, and we'll see how it goes.
Heather?
I'll apologize if I didn't catch it in the latest version of the draft that went to the board, but is the current way it's written first year is 1.15, and if it's trending upward, and if it's going down, it has to be 1.1 at year 15, or are there limits on that spread?
There are limits on that spread too.
So the only thing that I would say around that is that we had a very detailed conversation about this with underwriters and syndicators, et cetera, at that retreat, and we find on small projects, the more accurate we get on our expenses and costs and projections, that's great, but we don't have crystal balls to know what's going to happen in year 15 or year 7. So the way you guys look at it, a 2% on income and 3% on operating is a great kind of rule of thumb, but on a very small project or small projects, you could start at 1.15 and just a little bit of adjustment on, there's just less of a spread, so those could spike by year 15 and look like you're going to get 2.5 or 4.5 debt coverage ratio. In reality, you're not going to get that because nothing ever trends 2%, 3%. That's just kind of a safe assumption. So it's this weird equation that happens. And that's why when we had the discussion, I think everybody agreed that you have to hit 1.15 at the beginning to be safe through, and you have to hit 1.1 by year 15 on the downward trending, and the rest of it is basically you're projecting. Now, we can throw in different numbers and tweak it and adjust it so it doesn't look any different than what you're trying to limit there. No project will ever be an even 1.15 to 1.35 in reality. Well, it might be if you're, paying reserves or not paying your reserves, or you're not paying your asset management fee. We just juggle these every year and annually, so we can tweak the projections and fall within these. But I think the real litmus test for you guys is 1.15 on the front and 1.0 at the end. That's your security that the project will not go under on one end or the other. Aside from that, maybe we should be reporting these to you annually. I just don't know if we can make the spreadsheet say that it's going to do that, but I just think it's a little artificial to try to throw in a cap on the end, like the 1.15 to 1.35. Your starting number is here for income and here for expenses, and one's going up by 2%, the other's going up by 3%. It's not going to fall in that boundary. It's not, these aren't flat. So I caution trying to I get you're trying not to over subsidize.
What is the change recommended from the
We have had struggles with the DCR on the applications coming in. Some of them are coming in very, very high. My comment on what Heather said, though, is this 1.15 to 1.35 is in the first year. It's first year. Yeah, that's what we're looking at is the first year.
But if Penny goes to the second page, the next page, if it's right there, if it's trending downward, then we look at 110 to 150 in year 15.
And that's still in the first year.
Right, and we understand that it's all projections, and I get it. But what we need to have, at least from my standpoint, is when they come to audit us, we have underwritten them to some sort of standard, and this makes some sense to us, I guess.
The way I read that is that because it says projected, like, we're not holding you to those. We're just asking for, like, what do you expect to happen? Is that correct?
Yeah, and we're looking primarily at that first year.
And just to be clear, where this came from is Heather brought it all up, so I'm going to blame it all on her. We had long conversations about it, and they were good because we were going to stick them to some underwriting standards that weren't going to make sense to your project. But rightfully so, if you kind of know the rules to these beforehand, it gives you a better way of getting there. So that's where we're at. So your other question, Bob, is we're recommending that I think this is kind of workable for right now, and of course we'll take a look at it as we move along, but we'd like to keep this language the way it is.
motion?
Okay, so also on comments, Homeward, other underwriters are using different assumptions that they should be able to explain other underwriting. RCAC, that we should trend the reserves that other underwriters trend. Staff comment on that. The trending of the reserves is that MBOH does not require a trended amount on reserves. It's a flat annual.
It's bottom of 107, top of 108.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Greg.
And these are just our requirements. We're not telling your underwriters they have to do it. Of course, they're going to do their own thing, but if they're aware of what we're doing, hopefully that'll help you negotiate your terms with them also.
And we're all underwriting for different purposes. So,
Okay, and then to section 3 on page 17 in the hard copy. I think it's just the next page, Penny. Maybe it's the same page you're on. We have a comment that on those underwriting standards that the top on the operating expenses should be 5 instead of 6. And then project accessibility, page 17, we just have comments from Northern Central Independent Living Services. When building communities amenities, please consider accessibility for all when designing for apartment communities. Parking for Montanans with disabilities, their attendants and families can be an issue in some cities due to the allotments of parking spaces in planning for units. And staff's comment was, excuse me, I forgot part of it. We encourage strong advertising for accessible features when advertising new construction through the multiple listing services or through Montana Housing Search. That comment could be inserted above as a consideration above the project accessibility requirements.
Mary, could you give us a reference to the page of the comments, maybe where that is, so that the board could see more specifically?
Those are the ones from Shyla, Bruce. I believe it's in an email format. Nope. Yep. Page 26?
Page 26.
Action to include that language?
Yes, you would need an amendment.
And you're okay with that, Mary?
Yes.
To add that? Yeah, so that's...
Yeah.
A motion to include those 2 paragraphs as outlined by Mary on page 36.
Is there any comments on those 2 paragraphs? Any public comment? All those in favor? Okay, motion carries.
Sorry. Section 3, page 19, which is 2 pages further in your document, Penny. The required blower door and infrared testing for projects. Alex referred to the code. We have references to the code. MPEG has concerns on how many units need to be tested. We had a conversation with building codes. The requirement actually per code is that every unit has to be tested or the building has to be tested. Staff would recommend that we take the blower door test part out of the QAP and leave it to building codes. Correct.
And now, would that be this entire section, 2 paragraphs require blower door and infrared testing?
It would be the blower door, not the infrared. The blower door, the first paragraph is about the blower doors. But the infrared is not code.
I would move to strike the language regarding required blower door tests in this section.
Second.
Is there any comments? public comment on blower doors?
Just for clarification, I'm not sure if we have the requirement elsewhere about complying with code, but do we need to amend this language, Mary, or just take it out?
We can just take it out. We do have that they have to meet code, period.
Thank you.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And then staff did a small change that I want to bring to your attention. The infrared stated all units. We're recommending that that be at least 20% or a representative sampling and a representative sampling of the common areas, and that staff may require changes in those numbers. And that part you did adopt with what you did initially. Okay. On the next page, the 130% basis boost, the MBOH discretionary boost, comment from Homeward. We did have a lot of discussion about this at the QAP session, and they're suggesting that maybe there should be some kind of incremental boost for various considerations. A lot of our discussion was really everybody's getting that boost. And some of the discussion that staff had, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bruce, but I think that we decided that the 9% could easily take care of a lot of the boost issues that were out there initially.
We did propose a sliding scale for the basis boost, and the rationale behind it is this. We did discuss it quite extensively, and it was mentioned that basically everybody was getting it. I'm not sure how the comment that the 9% will take care of it does address it, but I think that it can be used as an incentive if the a sliding scale is set up to incent folks to look at providing units for the very much lower income, the 50, 40, 30% of AMI. And I think you have our whole comment section in your packet. Mary said it went out, so you should be able to find that schedule in there. I have copies if you'd like me to distribute them. But I would strongly suggest that you look at that and, in fact, do implement a sliding scale for use of the basis boost to incent more units for very low-income folks.
And that would have been in the packet that went out, or in the comments that went out with your packet.
Okay. Any other comments?
So, Mary, do you agree with Kevin's rationale that a sliding scale would incent more units?
I don't know that. First of all, when we have done anything to incentivize going below 40% AMI on units, those projects all have had to come back and ask the board to remove the 30% restriction from their properties because they can't cash flow. They have all been changed. And because of that, we have not done anything to incentivize below 40% AMI.
Well, actually we have, because part of what we did and part of through that whole process, so we incentivized below 30%. We found out we were having problems with that because folks were committing. So rather than doing that, we gave additional points if you brought a subsidy to do those lower income units. So
yep.
We didn't have that before that.
Forgot. Yep.
And that's the direction we went. And we said, well, if you're able to go out and get the subsidy to support those units, then great. We're going to give you all the credit in the world for that, because that's really what you need, to target those types incomes.
That is correct. Thank you. So we hit several levels, as you see listed there. When we give a boost, we don't necessarily give a full 130% boost. We give what is required to make it work.
Alex?
I think what's important is changing to 9% is a big deal in the way these projects garner a maximum award of credits. I go back to the applications I had when we had that 5-year lock of 9%, and there's a sheet in the application that lists the total credits that the project's eligible for, and then the total credits the project's requesting. And I would caution you in taking this boost out, because if pricing falls or there's some other change like that, this can be what saved us. When we went from the 9% to back to the floating rate, this boost is what made deals still work in Montana. Well, now we've kind of got both. We've got all three. We've got 9%, we've got good pricing, and we have the boost. I would leave the boost in and rely on your charge and direction to staff to not award more credits than eligible. Just because I bring a deal that says the math says I can support an allocation of $800,000 a year in credit, well, maybe I can get it done with only $600. And my concern is if you take it out or say we're not going to do it anymore, you could be tying your hands. I would leverage the federal mandate to not award more credits than necessary, as opposed to just taking this kind of tool out of your toolbox.
Any other comments? Okay. I guess we can move on.
This is Logan Anderson at MPEG. I would agree with what Alex said. We have incredible pricing levels right now, and I don't think that'll always necessarily be the case. So I think this 130% boost is very important to keep in there.
Thank you. Sheila?
So I just had a quick question, and Bruce, if you want to do this offline, but there's one line at the very bottom that says that basis boost does not apply to 4% credits. And just because I'm really interested in making 4% credits more usable, is that law or is that our decision?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Well, you can't change that even if you wanted to.
Yep.
At least you.
Well, you can, but we can't help you with that.
Thank you. Next page.
Okay. Second round. Heather, would you mind speaking to that on the second award round, rather than me trying to?
Mary, I noticed there was a comment that the first Monday in July was the 4th of July. Do we want to just say the first business day in July or something?
And staff did recommend that we put in language that if the deadline falls on a holiday, that it would be the next business day. Yep, that's technical. Yep. Second round.
Okay, so again, probably didn't see exactly what ended up in the board packet, but on the concept around use of second round, what we've been seeing, and we benefited and had the hurdle, and so did a project this year's round, of being the last project funded with the last bit of credits that were left. And so in combination with what's been proposed for the letter of intent to be a pre-application phase, and then projects move forward into the competitive round. We spend the money to put the deals together to be in the competitive round. You guys get through the allocation meeting and you're down to 400,000 in credits, and there's a couple of projects that have 430 or 450, that kind of thing as an example. Why not utilize, and we just haven't used it. We understand that we want to spend all the credits, get as many projects done as possible, accessing the federal set aside, that kind of thing. But more importantly, why don't we use the second round opportunity to say 1 month later, instead of us having to stand up and say, and of course we'll say we can make it work, or maybe we can make it work, you guys get to that end, and then anybody who's been invited to that round may resubmit their application, or at least the UniApp portion, to show the remaining credits would work. So staff would have the time to underwrite it instead of saying contingent on underwriting, contingent on underwriting. Maybe that approved pool that's come through can go back, retool, and show that it works, and only do it 30 days later or the next meeting. It was just a concept that we used to utilize second round for things like that, and you guys want to see how the projects go forward. It's a nice utilization of this new proposed pre-app process to give the opportunity to make sure the projects are still going to function and not be put into a disadvantage by being shorted 50,000 in credits, which can be $500,000, or we can't just reduce a couple of units and slash, on the fly in that first round meeting. It was something that we thought we should propose and at least talk about. And again, I apologize, our comments were late. They were just, it took a while to get everybody to hurdled it and in, but it would have been good for you guys to think about that yesterday, and I apologize for the late comments.
So with the way it's written, could the board do that anyways?
When we read it initially, maybe.
I mean, I know they have the option to do what they did this year, but they also could have had the option to say, you know what, we're going to go to a second round, and this is how we're going to do our second round.
I think what it
says.
says.
Greg question.
I think the way it's written, it does contemplate the full letter of intent and application as part of the second round. I don't know if essentially the board also can make the contingent award process, I think, is really kind of doing the same thing in a way, because you say, resubmit and show us if you can do it with these numbers. So I think that the current QAP does allow us to get to the same result.
I agree, and obviously we've benefited from that, and Gene got a project and he's making it work as well. It was just more at the last meeting, it was, one of the projects proposed was, could you just reduce it by a couple of houses? Would that project deal still work? Well, it's not that simple. Obviously, all the math that we do and everything in the QAP, the UniApp, is very difficult, and you have your soft costs. The nuance that we were saying, Greg, especially, is that, right, staff can still do that. But we've only gotten to the point where some of the projects are shorted by 30,000-ish. But what if you have you have $200,000 left of credits, and you have 5 or 6 projects that could use it, but it would be a totally different project. The gap, it depends. We were able to make it work on Sweetgrass. Gene can make it work because it's only a little reduction, but there's only so much left, and we do want to get them out the door. That second round concept of going back in to compete for them would be a good tool, and doing it quickly would be also very helpful. So I guess those are the nuances we were thinking about.
So you're suggesting, rather than awarding it to one project contingent on making an adjustment, all of the remaining unawarded projects could come back with a revised UniApp to compete for those additional credits? Is that the difference?
That's a little nuanced, because then all the information is in front of you, and staff has had a chance to say they think it'll work or not, as opposed to you guys having to do it contingent. It's one more meeting, but it's kind of the way it used to work, way back in the day. So it was just a point of consideration to make it a more thorough, show that it works process, because we would have been happy to put that application through 30 days later, showing what sources we'd be going after, or how it would be underwritten, how it would change. And if you have to make a physical change to a project to make it work, that, again, 30 days is a short time frame, but it's just not that easy at cutting off some units, or making project changes can be more of an impact. So I guess it's just kind of a stop and then reconsider with staff's underwriting built in.
So 2 things. I think, and I can't tell you where, but I think there's language in the QAP somewhere that says if credits become available, that we have to go out or allow applications to come in. So we need to make sure if we're doing something different that we do look for that language. The other thing that I don't know that you guys are aware of is that when we allocate all of the credits, when they've all been used and we haven't gotten any back before December 1st, we can apply to the national pool for extra credits, and we are starting to do that. It's going to mean maybe $10,000 in credits, but it's $10,000 in credits. That's $100,000. So those numbers won't come in until later. They would be late spring, early summer before we would know if we got those or what we got.
So how would we allocate those new national pool credits?
That's a process we're going to have to, I mean, we put out that we have this much in credits and somebody can apply. We're probably not going to have those within 30 days of the award.
I agree, and you probably, if you're looking at your first round credits, that's one thing, but there's a chance somebody could return credits. Somebody could come in outside the round and say we need 5,000 or 10,000 in credits. The national pool could come in, so there's a time. Maybe that's more handled under you can make an additional credit ask if it becomes available. Right. You just notify that those, it might have to be another competitive round.
I think we'd have to advertise that they were available.
We could, if the board wants to do this, we could create another, I guess, paragraph in here to allow the board the option of the kind of process that Heather is describing. It wouldn't tie the board to doing that, but it would allow the board that additional option if it made that decision.
I would want to move that we do add language that creates a modified second round of existing first round applicants. Limited to existing first round applicants. I think that's good we could do it either way. We could do a full second round, or we could do the optional limited second round.
And we'll come up with the wordsmithing to make sure that
I'll second
that way.
Any other comments? Any public comment on that proposed amendment? All those in favor? Okay, amendment passes.
Okay, moving on to the board consideration and determination process. This is where we have suggested that the board have a new process to invite applicants forward. We have some comments that this is my summation, but Alex, that doesn't support the change with only a 10-minute presentation, a 2-page narrative, and a single spreadsheet. No requirement for a market study. The major part of the full application is proving development team can deliver the project, verifiable, demonstration of need, financial underwriting, financial partners, appropriate positioning of the project in the market, necessary approvals, and site control and appropriate infrastructure. Don't believe a determination can be made on a 3-page package that best meet the pressing needs of the low-income people in the state of Montana. It is for those reasons that I request all projects, if they meet minimum requirements and minimum scoring, are given, given to full consideration for an award of housing credits. Travoy also has suggested that we, I lost my place here, that we abandon the proposed change. Homeward feels it's that it's a good idea, but that we should be requiring, or that the projects move forward should be 150% of the ceiling and 10 applications. HRDC 9 supports the new process.
And Mary, if I could jump in just for a moment, this is Don Sturhan with Mountain Plains Equity Group.
we would add our names to the list of those that support the change as proposed by staff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
I think in an effort, I think in our discussions about this, it seemed very important that, to have the expense for 20 or more projects to come to the finish line. We're trying to figure out a way to, whether it's a diversification of location, small, big, cost, whatever. I think it's a good idea, but I in some ways I agree with Alex on this point that there should be some criteria that is defining. In other words, what is that first threshold going to be? Is there a way we can create an initial look that takes into consideration timely considerations that the board's going to have? The one that's been brought up is location. It could be poverty areas. It could be growth areas. Whatever the board wants to decide, and then let's look at the applications based on those criteria. If we're going to, thin them out so that we can save some work and money. If not, I agree that we should just let everybody come, but be prepared to have 2/3 of them go away very unhappy.
I think Heather had a comment.
I was going to add that Alex and I were laughing about this. We're saying the same thing. We support it, but you need more information at the time of the letter of intent, what Bob just outlined. I think this is a really good proposed process, but we will be obligated to provide more information at that front litmus test. I think that's important because the way the letter of intent is now, it's not enough detailed information, and so I think that's the hiccup that we ran into.
I would comment, Travois did comment that one of their objections was that this would result in an allocation being made without consideration of the mandatory federal criteria. I guess I would disagree because it's not the allocation, but it is a winnowing down of the projects that would be considered. And I think, in my view, the answer to that is to be more specific or more inclusive in what's required in the letter of intent, so that we do have the information to the greatest extent possible to address the federally required factors. And certainly any further selection criteria the board would want to add would be, again, would define it further, would probably be beneficial.
So one thought I had, a little bit different way to approach it, is that at this point when the board is making those decisions, and it's really just a mindset rather than anything, is that the board is not interested in funding these at this time, rather than you get, we're making decisions going forward that on a small amount of information, that you're making a decision to bring that forward, rather that a 30-unit project in 2DOT aren't interested in doing, just because it's not the right thing to do. And I don't know what the criteria would want. I think if we want to have criteria that you're going to make those decisions on, that has to be decided now.
Before Alex speaks, and I really like the concept. I think we're light on details. I really think we're light on details.
I guess I was going to say, Mary had to summarize my comments because they were long, because through the comments I was weaving back and forth, trying to figure it out myself, I think. But like Heather said, it just comes down to what information is necessary to make those decisions. I agree with Greg, it's not really an award, but it is definitely a winnowing down, and I think there could, and another concern that didn't make it into the summary of my long-winded comments were, honestly, as a developer, with a spreadsheet and just a nickel's worth of knowledge, I can put together a letter of intent in 5 minutes. And my concern would be that somebody gets in their car and drives around the state and has a 1-hour conversation with the city manager or the mayor or the planner, and you get a ton of letter of intents. And all of a sudden you've got to sift through, and what's the quality of those? When we put together an application, we're investing, you know, not even just the time and the money, but also we're talking with people in that community. We're starting to, you know, this is something we could bring. I know this is a problem. And I think that without a significant more amount of information, you got to be able to fully vet a project. But I think really what we're after is how do we distill what the board's interested in, so, you know, mutually we're not using up each other's time and staff's time. This just came to me, so I'm not sure if it's good, bad, or indifferent. We recently got a report card on my second grader. Maybe after letters of intent, you guys assign letter grades or something. You know, this is a top tier project, this is a second tier, this is a third. You know, my preference would, we decide if we want to keep going. My preference would be that you would kind of say, this is what will make a top tier project in the QAP, but absent that, because we've been talking about feedback and we're kind of trying to distill it, maybe it's some sort of, this one got an A, this one got a B, this one got a C, this one got an F. You know, redo the class. If I tell you, as a developer, I would love that. If you said today, in 2017, we're going to fund rehab, well, I sure as heck wouldn't turn in a new construction project.
I mean, if you were going to tier them, like you're saying, I mean, that probably wouldn't be much of a change. I mean, we may need to add a little bit of language that just says we're going to, rather than invite only a certain number to go forward, we're going to rank a certain number as a top tier and then the rest of them as a bottom tier, but you're still able to come forward if you like.
And the last thing I'd add is, even in that scenario, as Heather said, we got to get you more information. And I think a key thing, some information on the development team and also the market. I mean, basically, you need a market study to figure out what's the difference between market rent and proposed rent. What are the number of households that need this? You know, I don't know if I'm doing it right unless I've got a market study.
Benny? Andrea, are you there?
I am, and I think I'm unmuted. Am I?
Yep.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning, board members and staff and all guests there. I just wanted to reiterate both Alex's and Heather's comments. I do think that additional information is helpful for the board to discern who should be invited into the actual pool of full-on applicants. And then Mary indicated, as did Alex, and I want to reiterate the need for, I think, all of us as a community, from the Board of Housing as a decision-making body and the staff to applicants, that it would be incredibly important and helpful for the board to establish housing policy and priority. So comments received, or comments we heard during this last round of the 2016 applications, indicated that there are some board members that are not interested in funding USDA rural development projects, as an example. And as you all know, there are a number of these projects that are coming due for preservation and rehabilitation in the state. And that's just one example of one project type. Then, of course, we know there are a number of projects that would be eligible for preservation. And there's a lot of pressure on us as a development community in terms of those agencies looking to low-income housing tax credits as basically the only viable source of capital to preserve these projects moving forward. If the board's initiative is to develop solely new construction, because that's where we are as a state and a community, and I can totally get that. Development ebbs and flows. Sometimes we need to focus all of our resources on one type of development to make real impact and then turn and focus on another. But as Alex just mentioned, as a developer, it would be extraordinarily helpful and also a wise use of our resources and time to know that you're not going to fund a preservation project and or a new construction project if that's the board's initiative. So you had a retreat yesterday. I'm assuming that a lot of this conversation took place there, and this doesn't have anything to do with the language in this section, but I wanted to take the opportunity to really encourage the board to start establishing more of a priority or a policy, housing policy or priority piece, so developers can basically respond to that. And this section, of course, is basically the implementation of that concept. Thank you.
So one thing about the letter of intent, the forms are now not part of the QAP. So the form is something that could be worked on by staff before the applications are, long before the applications are due. But so if you want to go forward with this, we could do some refining of what's required there.
Mr. Chair, I think we should have a board meeting on priorities, and I think it's going to be one of the hardest board meetings we have. I also think that we should have a board meeting that establishes what we want in the letter of intent. They could be at the same time. But for today's purposes, I'm going to suggest that we amend the motion to change the board consideration and determination process to include a ranking rather than a selection of only 10. So all letters of intent would be ranked by some methodology by the board, and then the developer can make the decision of whether or not they come forward with that or not.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, you're going to have to establish. I would think you're going to need to establish some priorities then.
Yeah, I think if we're going to do that,
within that letter of intent process, I guess.
We need to have those priorities part of the QAP as well.
Yep. So
right now, what you said is you're going to look at them the same way you look at other projects that come in. I mean, so you're going to look at the cost per square foot, the location, that whole laundry list of things you guys look at. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that we're prepared to, at this meeting, and to put into the allocation plan a list of priorities. I think that if that's the case, we're off a couple months here.
Yep.
And that's going to completely put us off.
We won't be able to. The time period that it takes to get the QAP processed through the director's office, through the governor's office, and through the ARM hearings will put us after the deadline to have the QAP approved.
Well, I guess what I was thinking was, rather than, I mean, that can be something we also work on for next year, but this year, as the letter of intent, and rather than just saying we're going to invite everyone to come forward and it's your own chance, the board will actually look at the laundry list of things that they always look at and kind of say, here's our kind of top tier or tier 1 projects, and here's our tier 2 projects. Now you guys decide if you want to come forward or not. At least it will give you more information to make those decisions. Wouldn't necessarily need an invite, but at least you'd know that I'm in the tier 2 group, and that probably ain't a good place to be, you know, although the decision hasn't been made, and it wouldn't be out of the realm that a project in the tier 2 group would ever be funded. It would just, you know, kind of gives you a sense of the direction the board's heading and their priorities this year.
I think we're all kind of saying the same thing. It's a mechanism to get there, and the QAP has strict deadlines of when it can be approved and not, and go through the process. But as Mary stated, the letter of intent can be changed before that's like an exhibit that can be changed, and that's a discussion that could be had. What information could be provided in that time to utilize how this is stated now? It would probably almost be worth you trying this out and noodling with the letter of intent to see, because I understand why staff is recommending it, and it was an interesting conversation to have as a group. If we can provide enough information up front so you guys make good recommendations, part of our comment was give enough choices to you at the application round. You know, make sure there's at least 150% and at least 10 projects. I know we're asking you to give guidance by inviting us to move forward. I think it's worth a try. My question to Mary and staff, when do you do site visits? That's another thing because staff resources are being stretched.
We were doing them as soon as we knew what letters of intent would be, and we would still do that. I would. Oh,
I guess my point would be that a deeper, stronger, more thorough letter of intent would be helpful for you on that, because I think it would push us to have more detail, and I think that's what we're getting at. You don't have enough detail the way it's written now.
Simple example of the detail, a letter of intent doesn't even require a site. Doesn't require a site identified. It's a community.
I just want to bring the group's attention back to the fact that we're saying, are we going ranking or are we selecting 10? The letter of intent's not under consideration right now. And my motion is that we do a ranking, not a selection. So just so people are understanding what we're voting on right now.
Thank you, Sheila. So we'd rank them 1 to 20? Is that what you're saying?
Whatever we get.
Whatever we get. So you'd pick number 1 through 20, or would you pick tier 1 and tier 2 projects?
Bob's telling me 3 tiers, so we got 3 tiers.
What quadrant do you want?
3 tiers.
That's an inside joke.
Left over from yesterday.
You know, but I'm such an anal person, which I am, is that I like criteria and I don't have any. We're talking about tiers, 1, 2, 3. Well, what does that mean to me? Nothing.
Well, you know, here's the thing, and it's a little dance that we go through. The more objective information that we put out to clarify what we want, we have fabulous responders. So we get 20 applications that are within a point of each other. Where can we bring some competition? Where can we see some creativity from the developers rather than just rote? You know, I mean, I guess that's what I would like to see. Where's the thoughtful analysis of the project, the need? Maybe it's not written in the QAP, but we're needing more flexibility for us to make judgments based on common sense rather than following the directions, you know? I mean, and I don't know if that's even possible, but I would hope we could somehow get there, you know, a little closer to that.
It doesn't, I don't know if it necessarily fixes part of what we were trying to do on a staff level, is to kind of start narrowing it down so we're not trying to underwrite 25 projects on full underwriting. So, I mean, I would support anything that tries to narrow the field down. So either we narrow it down and say we're only going to have this many come forward, or we at least give projects a better idea that if you're coming forward, you're in the bottom rather than the top. So it'll hopefully naturally narrow the field. But
well, Bob, you're the no RD guy, and I'm not really. I am putting you on the spot. Yes, that's exactly what. But that's criteria. Are you willing to do something like that?
I'm not a developer, but I'm going to speak up here relative to the projects and getting there. The common sense that was just mentioned, yeah, you guys should make decisions based on common sense, but it'd be good for the development community to know what this year's assessment of common sense is. One of the elephants in the room seems to be always, well, Bozeman had a project last year, so they aren't going to get one this year. You know, if it's your common sense to say we want to spread them around the state, if the developers know that up front, then that helps them and it helps you, because they're not going to put in a project for Bozeman because they know it isn't going to fly this year because they got it last year. So those kinds of common sense things would be good to know up front.
So I forget, do we have a second on your motion?
I did.
Thank you.
Right wing took care of that.
3 tiers, 3 quadrants. She said 3 tiers, 3 quadrants.
Is there any more comments? All those in favor? I'm going to be the tiebreaker with a no, only because I don't feel like I have enough information yet. Pat's gone.
Just
So
for
motion fails.
Sorry, just for recording purposes, make sure you still hit your button when you're saying aye and no, just to let you know.
Thanks. No.
No.
Yes.
Back to square one.
And for clarification, it does, I guess we'd like some direction as to what do you want to see in the letter of intent? Do we need to beef that up? It sounds like most people are saying we do.
So we can, we can add things to that even as forms, can't we, Mary?
We can add as forms. My question would be, and it's comment from developers and from board, do we want to go back to a mini market study at that point then? To have more information. We had suggested that we would use construction start date, cost per unit, cost per square foot, the location, the credit ask, credits per square foot, percentage paid by housing credits, and new unit demand. The new unit demand that we were contemplating using is figures, new unit demand would not be available from the developers without at least a mini market study. We had contemplated using white paper information which would be updated annually with census updates.
So, Mary, help me with what's on page 27 and what you just read. Do we need to change page 27 to match your reading there?
Letter of intent, no. I think if we're going to require, if you want to require a mini market study, and that's a discussion thing. If we want to require a mini market study with the letter of intent, I think we need to add language to do that. The rest of it we can take care of within the form. The information I was talking about is the spreadsheet that we gave you last time.
I just want to clarify then. So that list may be different than the list here on page 27, but we're okay with that, with the exception that we want to strike some part of the last sentence.
Okay, so my page 27 is different than yours, I think. So what?
Page 118 of the packet.
118 in the packet. Page 27 of the application.
So Sheila, are you suggesting
okay.
that highlighted section right there, instead it says a market study or mini market study is required, as opposed to no?
Yeah, it's saying that there isn't one. Do we want to?
Yeah, so if we change the word no to a.
Right, if that's what you want to do.
I definitely want some more market information because that's my.
Heather and Alex, is that kind of what you have been?
Is a mini market study sufficient?
My suggestion would be to do as JP has suggested, say a market study or mini market study, and then Mary, in the attachment that has the LOI description, you come up with the boxes you want. New unit demand, rental, difference between proposed rent, market, vacancy. You come up with the information you want, and then we'll put that to our market study people, and they'll get it.
Okay.
I would move that we change the word no to a in this sentence.
Second.
Is there any more discussion on this horse? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, passes.
Okay, back to Section 6 under the maximum award. We have a comment of support for MBOH may award housing credits from a future year's available annual credit allocation at any time outside the competitive cycle for purposes of funding repair or replacement of a project building due to life safety emergency as determined by the board. So there is support of that. Okay, Section 8, threshold requirements. Number 9. Let's see, we put in language to, the comment is that the language should be changed back to the way it was. The language got changed to require an approval before application of zoning change. Staff recommends that we do for which a change request has been submitted. And that language is in what you already approved. To where? Oh, yes, thank you. So on page 24, under fees, it's developer owner of a project awarded credits will be required to reimburse MBOH for legal fees and expenses incurred by MBOH with respect to any non-standard request, change, document, or other matters relating to reservation, initial allocation, carryover commitment, compliance, or other aspects of qualifying for or obtaining housing credits. Such fees and expenses must be paid within 30 days of MBOH submission of an invoice. The reason for that is we have incurred some fairly significant legal fees with some project special stuff that's gone on. Okay. Back to Section 8, threshold requirements. That number 17 is the same comment from RCAC about the nonprofit affiliation. We ended up with a number 27 clarification that was taken out and combined with 22. Section 9. The scoring. Number 4, housing needs consideration or housing needs characteristics. At the QAP session, we had talked about this used to be a 40-point category for all of those, and during the QAP session, we changed it to 10 for each of the 4. Alex had a comment that we should further define each category and should change to 20 points for each or all, and 20 points for the city and county. MPEG comment was breaking down the points seems to create busy work for developers.
Mr. Chair, my comment was simply that there's 4 items listed in there. I'm just going to test my eyes. Neighborhood meetings, charrettes, other appropriate community input, and or city, county commission meetings. And I guess what I suggested is, you know, if you do any or all of the first 3, you get 20 points. And if you do the second one, you get 20 points. The idea being the first 3 are kind of, how do you define what a charrette versus a neighborhood meeting is versus an other meeting? I mean, there's kind of seems to be 2 distinct categories in there. One, which is a governmental meeting, and one, which is a community meeting. That was where I was going with that.
So to us, I don't know.
I don't think it particularly makes any difference to staff. It was one of those spots that we thought we could spread the points a little bit further. So that's just, I think, that was the discussion part.
Any comments from board members? Okay, moving on.
Okay.
Leave it as is for now.
Under number 5, qualified census tract. There was a comment to remove existing housing from that involves existing housing.
I believe existing housing is part of the federal requirement that this item mirrors.
I don't think it is. The QCT is the federal requirement.
Actually, the way I read this is it can either be 10 points if it's located in a qualified census tract, or if it involves existing housing and it's part of a revitalization plan. So
right.
Existing housing is only tied to the revitalization plan. It's not under the current language required for the QCT.
That's my understanding also. And so yeah, that is the comment. I thought there was a second one. And existing housing, I think it was a staff comment. Do we need to have this in there as we're giving other points for preservation? Okay, moving on to the amenities. We have a comment from the HRDC 9 that they support the simplification. They would like to add other to the list. Staff has moved to taking other off of those lists, both the green and the amenity, because we end up with a huge laundry list of other that get to be things that other people may not consider actually in that category.
Is there a list? I mean, I'm reading here, and since I don't have it in front of me, the list of amenities.
It's a form that you have attached.
Page 147.
After scanning through this, I'm kind of curious, based on the discussion we had earlier on amenities, if we could just eliminate amenities altogether out of here, out of the queue. Or AP.
That was actually staff's intent before we went to the QAP session, and we got pushback. So.
But I think in the discussion with the board is it tends to be, you know, our job is to supply affordable housing, and this just tends to be additions onto it that just cause more cost and not necessarily, you know, make any difference to the reasonable housing.
Staff actually agrees.
Yes, you can amend it out. That's your choice.
Well, I would make a motion to amend out amenities out of the QAP.
I'll second.
Okay, made and seconded. Any other comments from board members?
I'm going to vote against this motion because I just think amenities add something that it's important for, like, example, a community room that builds community within the project. So I'm not ready to strike them completely, so I'll be voting against this motion.
And I think it gives the developers discretion, and it makes, it guides us towards, there's some of my criteria, some of my decision making, and then I get to make choices.
And I also believe that the developers may need to put those amenities in it to make their projects more, what do I want to say, sound in their communities. But not all communities are going to need those amenities to make them, you know, make them right. So I'm going to vote for this.
We will provide you a list of those amenities still. You'll know each project and what amenities they're including.
Right.
I do think that rather than striking the whole section, it's probably important to mention that luxury amenities are not considered, and maybe a friendly amendment that would just strike all reference to points, but leave the wording of amenities in there.
Yeah, that'd be fine with me.
And with me.
Okay, clarify that.
So leave that whole section, but delete any reference to points. So there would be no points available for amenities.
So move it to considerations, initiatives,
well,
whatever, instead of in the scoring categories.
My thinking is that it gives the developers the option of pointing out which amenities they are going to be providing in their project, and if they can make it seem reasonable and fit into the cost basis of their project, that it gives us the ability to consider a project that offers amenities at the same cost basis without the developer receiving points for just adding amenities in. And I'd like to hear from developers too if they have some thoughts.
Mr. Chair, I think that's a great idea. I mean, practically, we would just do the same application where in the narrative we tell you which amenities we were planning and justify them, why we needed them. For example, community room for a senior building, for sure. There just wouldn't be points associated with it. I think that's a great idea.
And we'll figure out how to have it in the allocation plan here. I mean, whether it's here or somewhere else in the wording, but we'll figure that out after the fact.
Kevin?
Yep. Wafer Bozeman had actually suggested expanding the amenities list, but I think this is a better solution to leave it in there and assign no points, and hopefully the developers don't feel they just have to put it in just to get the points, but they can sell you on amenities for their specific community. So I would support that.
Heather?
I would agree. I mean, the rub for us was the list was a little prescriptive, and some places need certain things, and then there's other ideas that don't count for points. So it's not in the points that makes sense. You still want to incentivize it, though. I think you guys will by your decision-making process, and you'll have that list because you don't want to just have rubber stamp vanilla lack of community room, lack of those things. So yeah, I support. It's a good thing to try this year.
I'd like to add on one more comment. Given if you go this direction, I think you ought to put the other back in.
Yeah. Well, and staff can change that form outside of the QAP, so that's not something you need to.
And I imagine that the staff is going to want some narrative explaining the amenities that are chosen and why they fit, yes.
Is there any other comments? All those in favor?
There's an amendment.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
Okay, and then to the green building category.
Yes, Kevin?
I'm sorry, just one comment. Perhaps an intended consequence of doing what you did is you have decreased the total number of points available. So I think this will require that you look at the number of points you're going to ask for qualification to move on in the scoring criteria, because you've taken 40 points essentially out of the
the minimum. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Thank you.
We raised, just clarification, we raised the number of points available from 1,300 to 14 something, and the minimum was wasn't adjusted. Maximum.
Just to belabor the point, and I apologize for that, but we're strong advocates of increasing the total number of points available. So in fact, you create the opportunity for developers to differentiate themselves by choosing one particular area to emphasize and not. So just because you had increased the maximum number of points, I would encourage you to find other places to add points rather than just saying, well, we had increased anyway, so we can cut back. I think one of the issues is you want to have the opportunity for a bigger spread, which will give you, the board, more opportunities to find the differences between the projects.
Thank you.
Okay, and then on the green building, we had a comment from the development team at Travoy to remove this scoring category.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
The green.
I'm not sure in my thought process whether I would agree on removing it altogether. I think there's a certain amount of need for energy conservation standards within here that they are complying with them. I don't know how much of it actually is in code anymore. You know, as far as new construction, but in the rehab side, do we kind of need to have those energy standards? But I do believe that we should eliminate some off the list of you know, photoelectric type situations, hot water heater, you know, or solar hot water type situations. Those need to be eliminated from points off of this, because yes, they get the points when they build the project, but we see too often, or at least I see too often, that people that put these on their projects, when they go bad, they never get replaced. And so, yeah, you have them to begin with, they're just extra cost on the project, and really what are they, you know, supplying to the project. So I think I would, rather than to eliminate this portion altogether, you know, I'd probably be even, you know, interested in eliminating the points if they, you know, made sure that they've supplied those those energy efficient type standards within the, in the project.
So, Penny, can you easily bring up that list by chance? The green initiatives
148.
form. I'm sorry, 128. Did you say?
148.
148. You know, attempting to address the concern that was voiced relative to developers who might put these in initially and then let them go defunct and not keep them in repair, I would certainly much rather see some language that requires them to continue to be operational over the life of the project, rather than not encouraging those to go in. I think that our perspective is, if you put in a lot of the green building initiatives, or if you put in a green building initiative, there's certainly a cost that you add to the project, but the resulting benefit is a direct benefit to your tenants. It's a lower cost of operation over the life of the project. So I would hate to abandon it because there are some bad projects that didn't pan out. If that's a problem, let's encourage them to continue to run those projects. You know, even one way to do that, although I don't know how far down the road this would go, but you have a segment of the QIP whereby you can take away points from future applicants for things that they screwed up on earlier, and that might be one of the ways to address that. But I think we should really encourage the green building initiatives.
And I don't disagree with what you're saying, but what I think I would rather see it put in a context that if the developer wants to put these out there on their projects, then they're doing it because it's a marketable for them. It's a benefit to them. And so for the board to actually go out and support these projects when we can actually get housing out there at a lower cost, I think I believe it's in the same realm as the amenities side. That if you would like to do that and it's more marketable for you in Bozeman, I'm not sure it's all that marketable for you in Havre.
Heather.
We've spent the last 20 years talking about this subject, so obviously Homeward has vested interest in seeing the green criteria stay, and the reason I say that is library or computer stations amenities are a little bit different than the one-for-one direct benefit given back to the residents that live in healthy, well-located, energy-efficient projects. So I think that the team that sat down after our January session ran through a brand new kind of checklist and a way to look at sustainable building in certain ways, and I think we should let it go forward and see if people can meet it, because again, it's a direct benefit to the residents. Durable products are direct for operating expenses. You're not going to have to replace them. We won't re-syndicate at year 15 if we build it the right way. You want more projects to get done, but you also want them to last and perform in a way that is responsible for the dollars spent and to the residents directly. So I would highly recommend going forward with points and the way it's structured, and maybe have a discussion about that attachment at a later date, because that's outside the formal QAP. But I would definitely leave the points in, because I understand the nuances of panels not getting turned back on, et cetera. There's penalties for that. We have to stay in compliance, and I know that staff worked really hard to talk to that group about how do you prove that that paint gets used and continues to get used, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But these are direct benefits to the residents and the longevity of these projects that are being built.
Any other comments? Okay. Okay.
Vicki, this is Andrea on the phone. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Andrea.
Really, this is more of a question than a comment, but I would be very curious if the staff have had the opportunity to connect with surrounding states or peers in the country to see how they've been able to address the ongoing compliance around the green building elements that are awarded points through the QAP process and then ongoing compliance and maintenance and management. My overarching comment to this is I really hope as a state we are looking beyond just what the marketability is of green building and of energy conservation. We truly feel that this is a social imperative, and as a Board of Housing, I would hope that this is a policy that you would want to perpetuate into the future as we continue in a very complex world and one that's dealing with significant energy and environmental issues. Thank you.
You know, and just real quick comment, I don't think we should do anything today, frankly, but I think it bodes well for all of us to review the effectiveness of the things that we have on that list and to not pay attention to is it working as we thought it would? And that's the discussion that I think that whether it's the board and or developers should further, and that we should address this and be back with it again with some specifics within the year.
Any other comments? Okay, moving on.
Okay, participation of local entity. Make sure that I'm not missing anything here.
I'm going to interrupt for a second again, and I apologize, but we skipped over development.
I was just looking at my stuff to go back. Sorry. So number 5, project characteristics. We have a comment from Kevin that suggests adding a new category for innovation in construction or operation, and you can expand on that, Kevin. That was my short.
Well, the comments that you received in your packets elaborate a little bit, and again, basically the direction of suggesting that there's a category for innovation in design and construction, in sense, because it's a scored category, developers to look at their projects and say, how can we do better with cost of construction, and how can we do better with cost of operation down the road? So it's a category that accomplishes a couple of things. One, it adds points to the overall number of points available. But secondly, and more importantly, it would incent developers to look creatively and say, there's a better way to do this, and that better way can cause a direct benefit. Let me propose that idea to you, and it may cost me something to throw that idea in there, but it's an overall benefit in the long run. So this comes back to the statement we wrote at the beginning of the comments that we submitted, in that we feel there needs to be a philosophical look at what this QAP does. It can guide developers to construct units that are more intended for extremely low-income folks, and that's high on our agenda. It can result in a lower cost of operation and construction if you provide the ways and means for developers to get there. So that's basically the intent of that, requesting that that category be added.
Any comments from board members? Okay. Moving on.
Number 6, development team characteristics. comment from Kevin that there's too many points in this category.
And again, what this comes around to is that last year you added 220 points to this category. The design of the category is to ensure, I think, that you have an experienced team in the project, bringing the projects forward. It disincentivizes new folks from getting in because it's particularly slants, in our opinion, the points that are awarded directly toward people who have experience. Again, relative to the overall points that are available in the application, allowing 330 points as opposed to the 110, which were the number of points that were allowed in 2015's QAP, skews the weight of this particular category. So in order to, again, encourage new folks with new ideas to come in and to provide the a more appropriate, in our view, distribution of the points and where you get the points, we'd like to see it lowered back down to the 110 that it was previously.
So, Mr. Chairman, we actually went back and looked at this after getting Kevin's comments, and we always appreciate the comments, but I guess as staff, we'd respectfully disagree. Development team characteristics is extremely important. We've seen projects where we've had folks come in with relatively inexperienced a team, including the developer and everyone else, that have really had a tough time getting going and even getting a project done. And the way we looked at constructing this, and then we've changed it over the years, is if you are a new developer, as long as you team with experienced, lawyers and engineers and consultants and whatnot, you're not disincentivized on coming in. The problem is if everyone is new to the team, then you've got issues, and I think you're going to have a hard time selling your credits too, because your syndicator is going to look at it and go, or they're going to give you such a low return on your credit, it's going to have a negative effect. So we've specifically tried to make it so someone new coming in can actually enter in and be successful, because that's really the key in our mind under this type of criteria. And Kevin, I do appreciate your comments, but I do disagree.
Any other comments on that section? Okay, thank you. Let's move on.
Okay, number 7, participation of local entity. Travoy likes the varying number of points. They suggest additional language for tribal projects to receive points for services provided within a 5-mile radius. We had comments that we should have different points for different services. Homeward felt there should be a scale of points. HRDC 9, that a nonprofit partner that also provides housing and community services should be provided with full points, and that that they should be able to use an MOU instead of a project-specific contract.
Any comments on that? Okay, next.
Page 39, the percentage of credits for total project costs. I think that, that we added a category, percentage of credits funding total project cost. Comment, Alex had proposed a graduated scale. Travoy
and RCAC both say to remove or strike this category. And in discussion with staff, we feel after talking about this some that this is one of those categories that could have unintended consequences. And staff would also recommend removing this for a next year discussion.
Any comments?
I would remove to strike this section.
Give a second.
I'll second it just for discussion.
So, Mary, what are the unintended consequences that?
Some of the things we didn't think about. One thing in tribal country, their access to other funds to fund a project other than to get a loan from the housing authority are pretty much non-existent. Developers who use conventional financing for-profit developers have almost no access to soft funds available, CDBG, home, other kinds of soft funds that are available. So it unintentionally disadvantages tribes especially, and advantages those who have access to soft funds. And I'm not saying, I'm not saying that I really think that this is an important category, but I think we need to spend more time looking at it and what some of those consequences might be.
Okay. Heather?
I can appreciate the fact that you do want to make sure you understand what it impacts. We support the concept, and I do think that's part of the nuanced discussion when you're weighing efficiency of credits, et cetera. So I support withdrawing it now, but maybe you're leaving it in there and asking us to still provide that information for assessment value, not necessarily points, but then also we can see how it impacts people. And what it really means is as it kicks those numbers out without it being a point threshold issue.
And it is information that we have in the last year or two given board members.
So would it be much more helpful to just strike the points rather than the section so that you have that information available for determining what happens in the QAP for next year?
That information is available through the financials that they have to submit. It doesn't need to be in that list.
Okay. Any other comments?
So, Mary, did you answer or not answer? Striking the points is okay, or striking the points from your perspective, not so yet?
Striking the points would be fine, and it isn't necessary to leave the language because it's the numbers that they have to submit for the financial parts of the application give us those numbers.
Okay, any other comments? All those in favor of striking that section?
Aye.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. No more section 9.
Yes, there's one more. Number 10. Number 10, developer knowledge and responsiveness. We have a comment, number 10, poor track record is not a clear definition. Is there a mechanism for checking which they referred to out of state? The developer does sign a form for us to check with other state agencies that they have listed, so we do check with other state agencies. There was concern about developers
aren't issued in 8823. Negative points are available under management weakness. I shouldn't say available, can be assessed. Under management weakness for 8823s, the only time a developer wouldn't be impacted by a management weakness is if it was a turnkey development. 90+%, probably 99% of the projects going forward, the developer organization is the general partner of the ownership. So it would, there is a connection there and would impact the developer.
Mr. Chair, Mary, in the past, I mean, I don't remember anybody getting negative points. Did they just automatically drop out at that point? Or if they got a negative number, I mean, they wouldn't, a negative number of this magnitude would take them out of the running almost immediately.
Yes, it would. If someone is going to receive negative points, if we're in a situation, especially on the management weakness side, they know about that. If they're thinking about an application, so they would think about that before they submitted. That's usually what happens as they think about fixing things and have a better record to go forward with an application.
So this item is really there just to keep people up and up?
Partially.
We're going to call it
our nuclear deterrent. Yeah. Yeah. It actually assists us on the compliance side if they have things hanging out there that they're dragging their feet on and that their organization is thinking about putting an application in.
Any additional comments on that section? Okay.
Okay, and then in section 9 under...
Sorry guys, this is Andrea. The mute is delayed.
Go ahead.
I want to point out some of the nuances that raises concern, or at least it did for us at Homeward, in the language that's used under demonstrated management weakness. The conversation that we had around substantial changes is directly related to this. So the definition of substantial changes includes, as we talked about earlier, potentially changing the square footage of common space, for example. And that's why we had a little bit of a heartburn about it, because when you go from schematic to final drawings, square footage of things like your common space is going to change likely by the time you get to the development of drawings. The other conversation that's really pertinent to this section is related to either the second round and or contingent awards. In the last 2 rounds, and that's just in recent history, we've seen this a number of times, projects are getting the balance of credit award, and they're left with a gap. In some cases, those projects have to come back for additional funds. We've looked at that as coming back for the balance of funds that we originally underwrote the project for. It's been defined in this QAP as requesting additional credits. The definition under demonstrated management weakness here is come back to the Board of Housing more than once for additional credits. So I'm raising this as a point of concern, because you can see how these things get knitted together at various points throughout this QAP. And on one hand, I mean, we certainly understand the reason to have this section included. The Board of Housing has to be able to enforce poor track record and management weakness. At the same time, if this is taken literally, there's concern that it could be overreaching.
I would just call the board's attention to the opening paragraph in section B here that says may be assigned. I think we can kind of nitpick this to death, but I would put my trust in the staff to decide whether or not Andrea's concerns for all developers would actually play out into negative points, because the staff does not have to assign negative points for any of these.
And then you could always dispute them, I mean, with the board at some point too. So there is some leeway in there.
Heather?
We did have a pretty internal discussion around this, and as Alex said, our dissertation and our letter is much longer than the summary. Yeah, we want staff to have discretion on that, and I think by the clarity around when do we update on square foot changes, because now we have full architectural drawings. As long as we have the steps and we're all thoughtful about when a change is made and we get it approved, I don't think there'll be any issues here. We're just nervous around a little bit of the ambiguity, but as Sheila pointed out, it's may assess, and I thought that the part where staff could consider was pretty clear, and there was a process around that. So we definitely need to keep this in here and just keep testing it, because we've played with it the last year or two, and I think we're just getting better of a clear understanding, and that it's not, we know who you're trying to watch out for. It's not, you're not trying to trip us up or anything, those of us that are, develop more than one project in the state. So I think we're comfortable moving forward.
And I'd also point out that there's been added a list of factors to be considered in deciding whether to assess negative points, and if so, how many, that would take into account the kinds of considerations that have been discussed.
Bruce, do you want to talk about the next one, the historic downtown?
We actually need to take a short few-minute break because we're going to run out of recording time on the call. Okay, for people that are on the phone, if you didn't hear Penny, we have to restart the call for the recording purposes. So if you can, when you get disconnected from the call here in a moment, just call back in, use the same number and the same code, and give us 2 or 3 minutes, and we will start back up.
Sure. And if you guys need to roll, you know, we will get it taken care of. Yeah. Yep. I'm still in the room. I can trip over it when it's taped down. I am. Just covering my bases. We're missing a board member.
All right. And what you could do.
Yeah, we can cover it.
Because we're just jamming it things then and all.
Okay, so let's keep moving here. We'll get started again.
Okay, one comment that I want to make is we did receive comments from Patrick Clear with Summit. Patrick has been very gracious in the past basically to proofread the document for us, and there are some clarifications in there, but nothing substantial that we need to do. So
staff with greatest help can deal with all of those. And if someone from out there is Summit, we really appreciate Patrick getting back on board to help us with that stuff.
Are we recording?
Yes.
Okay, Bruce, I'm going to let you go with the...
All right. And since Stace, we are on page 133 of the packet,
it's page,
and on page 18 of the comments.
And page 42, it's under the award determination selection standard.
So this comment comes from some of the outcomes of a KIN group, and the KIN group is a key industry network meetings that are being held as part of the Governor's Main Street project. And as you can see, the Small Business and Downtown KIN group had a recommendation number 3 that states, direct the Montana Board of Housing to set aside 10% of annual low-income housing tax credits funding to historic downtown residential projects. I'm not going to read my entire memo here. Basically, it says, in the past, we've had a number of these projects. At least to my recollection and staff's recollection, we have always pretty much funded those for a lot of the reasons. They're downtown, they're close to services, you know, location. So kind of just by the type of project they are, they tend to do very well in our ranking and our selection. So setting up a set-aside, I think, can be tricky and add a lot of complication to the process. What I'm recommending the board do is add to their list of bullet points things they will consider. If the project is being developed in or near a historic downtown neighborhood would be just one of the things that you would also consider. And I basically say the above proposal recognizes the importance of these types of projects without needing a specific set-aside. Furthermore, we will track housing credit issuance and development in downtown historic areas as a matter of practice and resource for community partners. So I'm requesting an amendment to include that language and to add that one additional bullet point.
I would like to make that motion.
I will second.
So we will wait for 1 minute until Jeanette comes back, because we need her to vote. And then I'll have to explain it to her again. Yeah, do you want to move on? Are there any other comments?
So also in that area, page 42, Travoy abandoned the clause that allows the board to disregard the scores. The National Housing Trust also urged MBOH to establish a point-based competitive scoring system that Montana is only one of 3 states that do not use a numeric scoring system to directly determine award recipients. And then on page 43, I don't think that's the right page. Actually, going back to the special needs, under special needs and on the selection criteria, there are categories they can get points for, and we have
130.
Page 130. We have limited those to 25%. The Olmstead Act advocates are working their way across the country going after states and development agencies that are funding projects that are putting special needs, developmentally disabled, physically disabled, veterans. There's a large laundry list anyway of if all of a whole housing development is targeted to those, they are saying you're warehousing them, and they're suing. The North Carolina is one of the states that was on the receiving end of that and lost several millions of dollars. So we're limiting what we will give points for to 25% of that targeted special needs population.
And we put it out that way for public comment because of that, right?
Right, but we had a comment.
Oh, we did. Oh, that for or against it, or just comment?
Not. It was from Homeward that they understand the 25%, and how can a project like the YWCA do domestic violence focused project and be able to limit who lives there? And our response to that is we're only incentivizing 25%.
So a 100% domestic violence shelter could apply if there's no penalty for that?
Right. We're only incentivizing 25%.
That makes better sense. We just read it, and we understand why you're doing it. So.
Okay.
Okay. Back to the historic downtown.
Well, back to the historic section.
So, Jeanette, we need your vote.
Thanks. I'd love to be a need.
So I'm going to abbreviate my conversation as part of the Governor's Key Industry Network groups. One of the recommendations out of the small, recommended that we put a set aside in targeting historic downtown residential projects. Instead of that, what I'm proposing is that since we tend to do those projects anyways, just because of what they are, we add that to our bulleted list of the things that the board may consider. And just, it's on page 133 of the packet. So we'd add a bullet right down here that basically says, one of the things you'll look at is the project is being developed in or near a historic downtown neighborhood. That kind of, puts it on the list, but it doesn't make it a set-aside. Have a motion and a second.
Correct.
Already, so.
Any other public comment or board comment on that section? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
Okay, and then we had a comment from Homeward that the method of assigning negative points is a good move in the right direction, that we're doing a good job there. Section 10, final allocation 8609, MPEG, we've already taken care of this because we took the blower door test out, so that you just change it to a certification for infrared testing. So that's something that we need to, because we took the blower door test out, we need to take that part out as part of that. Page 46 under the final, the top one, certification required for the blower door. Page 46 in the QAP that you got in your, it's under the final allocations in 8609, that first bullet down there. We need to take the required blower door test certification off of there because we're not requiring the certification anymore. We're leaving it to code.
I would move to remove.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Are there any comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And then in the compliance section, number 12, we refer to ownership and ownership management company changes.
141. Way to go, Penny.
I'm looking for it. Let's see. So with the draft we put out, we put a $10 per day fee if they don't notify us of the changes, and if no notification is received, that the board will research and identify the date of the change and impose the fees. MPEG thinks that we should not apply that to managers and site managers, and Homeward suggested that we maybe give a 3 to 5 day grace period for that change before we charge fees.
Any comments?
How many fees in the past have you assessed?
That fee is brand new. There would have been a fair amount.
Heather?
I was just going to add, this came from our asset management crew. We totally respect that you guys need to be told when there's a change, but sometimes they can literally, the site people will walk off the job and we won't hear about it either. We are going to mandate it in our property manager's contract that they have to, but that's why the 3 to 5 day, because sometimes you just don't know what happened, but we will notify you, or our property manager needs to notify you directly, because I understand the nuance of if you can't get to a site manager, you can't get to a unit, those sorts of things. So yep, we support it.
And staff would agree that a 5 day grace period would be reasonable.
Okay. Do we have a motion?
I would move to amend the language to include a 5 day grace period on this.
Second.
Any comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
And then under on-site inspections, also under the compliance monitoring, there is a 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th paragraph down, 1-line sentence. MBOH may schedule on-site inspections at any time with minimal notice. Travoy has concern about the minimal notice. It's been in there for a couple of years. The reason for it is that we get calls periodically from someone on a site, from tenants, and there is a serious situation and we need to go and check and see what's going on.
That would seem reasonable.
And I think that's the end of my list.
Is there any final comments on the QAP as it has been amended? Any public comment on anything that we may have missed?
Hey, Alex and Kevin and Heather, thank you. Your help was, it's really been useful for us. It's really been long, but it's
Heather and Alex, can you please sit next to each other next time?
Okay,
you might get one of those sibling rivalry things going if you have them too close together.
We're not quite done yet. We still actually have to vote on this.
I mentioned that when you were out. Though Summit submitted comments, and they are proofreading comments, and so they would be anything that we need to act on for those are clarifications. So we should be able to do that without action, board action.
Okay, final vote on the QAP as amended.
I move that we adopt the final QAP as amended today.
We don't need to, do we just need to vote? So all those in favor?
I wanted to make them up.
Aye.
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 Okay, and so quick update. You got the dashboard. We have some outstanding compliance issues from last year. They just started hitting the road last week for compliance. I don't know that we have spoken out loud to you about Makoshika Estates in Glendive. So Makoshika Estates was, I believe, placed in service around 2007, 2008. About 2011, we started seeing some serious shifting of the building. There's been some engineering research done on the project, and the soils are unstable. We've been working with Home and the owners, which are Action for Eastern Montana and Dawson County Economic Development. MPEG is the syndicator, and the investor is Wells Fargo. We've been on biweekly calls recently. The team of the owners, investor, syndicator are trying to make a decision whether it's possible to repair the building. Home and CDBG have been involved, and they were looking at some Home and CDBG funds to do that. HUD has kind of said no for repair as far as using those types of funds. They are still looking at repair, maybe using other funds. They are looking at replacing the units. They are looking at shutting the project down. So just an update. Bruce, do you have any more comments?
No, I think they're looking at every option they can. I mean, they're putting in a very, very good faith effort, but the reality is there just may not be a fix that works. Yeah. There may be, and we may be able to help them facilitate that, but we just want you guys to be aware of it, so it's not a surprise.
And that's all that I have.
So I'm next. Can I ask Stacy to kick us off with her update? Or are you first, or is Mary first? Or you don't? Okay, so we'll go to.
Okay. Hi, this is Stacy, Chairman, respected members of the board. Thank you. From an operations update, we will be working feverishly in the second quarter of the year. Yes, 4 quarters. To make sure that we continue with the strategic planning efforts, continue with career ladder development and job description development for the staff. We continue to work on internal policies and procedures and our standard operating procedures, including efforts through continuity of government and working with various partners around the state who have additional housing concerns. One particular that I would highlight for you is the reentry task force with the Department of Corrections. And we have been working, I sit on that advisory council on behalf of the Department of Commerce. And one of the major issues facing folks leaving institutions, whether it's Montana State Prison, the Women's Prison, or even any of our rehab facilities, is reentry in the community. And the housing that is available or accessible to them is in limited supply, of course, but also there are some additional challenges in the environment that ensure their ability to reintegrate back into their communities and fulfill the commitments of their probation, parole, or their community release. So we've been working with that organization and trying to look at options for housing. And we've partnered with our partners in the Montana Office of Tourism and Business Development to look at funds for study, as well as the folks in CDBG, the Community Development Division, to also assist them in their efforts moving forward. I've also been able to facilitate the Governor's Housing and Construction Key Industry Network, for which Sheila also serves. And we are in a place of having some very solid recommendations. We have, I believe, 4 recommendations
that all directly relate to housing development and recommendations to the governor's office to promote. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy.
I can just pile on here. So one of the recommendations is to actually fund the Montana Housing Fund, which we heard today has $180,000 left in it or something like that, but has always been vastly, tremendously underfunded. So I just want people to be aware that the KIN recommendation is a $25 million allocation to that fund, which we should put into our strategic planning from yesterday, because that's a board-administered fund. They're a staff fund, so we'll have to be prepared for that when that's funded.
Penny has two very quick things.
I just wanted to share two things in addition to what I had put on the dashboard that you can check later. Keep an eye on the HCT meeting. The next one is April 20th, and you can go to this area on our website and register for that. And you guys, the main thing I wanted to show you, I really hoped that I would have printed LegCon books for each of you, but they did not arrive yet. They'll probably be there today or something. But if you go here to our website and go to the community partner portion of it, roll down to the bottom button on the left-hand side, housing data and reports, and you can see it online. So you can at least get a little teaser and kind of, look at it. Let me know if you want a hard copy. If you would use that, that's perfect. And we also have the white paper on that same page. That's all I'm going to say today.
So the final things that I want to mention are in May, we have the Mountain Plains Housing Summit. So take a look at your calendars and see if that's something you'd like to attend. It's in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, so it's driving distance. The annual conference is the 23rd through the 25th. So let us know if you're going to be able to attend that. We will have the board working session on the 23rd. So I think it would be very good if you could all be there for that. And Paula, any paperwork? Are you good to go there?
Just other than I'm going to send out an email this week asking you in regards to the Mountain Plains and who's going to be able to attend the trainings.
And that's it.
Any last comments? Okay, thank you, everybody. We are done.